Привет. Я долго копался в источниках, чтобы собрать эту историю целиком, от самого начала до конца. Буду рад твоей поддержке. Приятного просмотра.
The origins of gladiatorial combat stretch back to the shadowy world of Etruscan civilization, where death was not merely an ending, but a transition requiring elaborate ritual preparation. Long before Romans packed the Colosseum to witness spectacular fights, the Etruscans had already established the fundamental framework that would define gladiatorial combat for centuries. Their approach to honoring the dead through ritualized violence created the template from which Roman gladiatorial games would eventually emerge. The Etruscan practice of minus represented far more than entertainment. It constituted a sacred obligation to the deceased. When prominent Etruscan nobles died, their families organized elaborate funeral ceremonies that included the forced combat of prisoners of war, slaves, and condemned criminals. These fighters, known as bustardiers, battled near the funeral pile or tomb of the deceased, their spilled blood serving as an offering to ensure the dead person's successful journey to the afterlife. The Latin term munus itself derives from the concept of duty or service, emphasizing the religious nature of these contests rather than their entertainment value. Archaeological evidence reveals that these funeral games occurred primarily during the burial ceremonies of wealthy aristocrats and political leaders. The Etruscans believed that the life force contained within blood possessed supernatural properties capable of nourishing the spirits of the dead. When warriors died in combat during these ceremonies, their vital essence supposedly transferred to the deceased noble, providing strength for the perilous journey through the underworld. This belief system creates a direct correlation between the social status of the deceased and the scale of the funeral games. More important individuals required more elaborate blood sacrifices. The captive warriors forced to participate in these early gladiatorial contests came primarily from military campaigns against neighboring tribes and city-states. Etruscan armies regularly captured enemy soldiers during their frequent territorial conflicts, and these prisoners faced several possible fates upon their arrival in Etruscan territory. Some became slaves for agricultural or domestic work. Others served as sacrificial victims in religious ceremonies, and the most physically capable found themselves reserved for funeral combat. The selection process favored individuals who demonstrated martial skills, physical strength, and the ability to provide an entertaining fight before their inevitable death. The tomb paintings at Tarquinia provide the most comprehensive visual record of early Etruscan gladiatorial practices. The Tomb of the Aurors, dating to approximately 530 BC, contains fresco depicting a masked figure called Fursu, who appears to be controlling or directing a combat scenario. This figure holds a long leash attached to a dog that attacks a man whose head is covered by a sack, while the victim attempts to defend himself with a club. The scene likely represents an early form of gladiatorial execution rather than a fair fight, suggesting that not all funeral combats followed the same format. More revealing are the paintings found in the Tomb of the Olympic Games at Tarquinia, which show armed combat between pairs of warriors wearing different types of protective gear. These fighters carry around shields, wear helmets with distinctive crests, and wield short swords similar to those later adopted by Roman gladiators. The artistic style and attention to detail in these frescoes indicate that the artists witnessed actual combat, as the positioning of the fighters, their defensive stances, and the realistic depiction of their equipment all suggest observation rather than imaginative interpretation. The archaeological site of Vulti has yielded additional evidence of Etruscan funeral games through both tomb paintings and physical artifacts. The Francois tomb, discovered in 1857, contains elaborate fresco depicting various scenes of violence and sacrifice, including what appears to be gladiatorial combat. These paintings show fighters wearing distinctly different armor styles, suggesting that the Etruscans had already begun developing the specialized gladiatorial types that would later become standard in Roman arenas. Some warriors appear in heavy armor with large shields, while others fight with minimal protection and smaller weapons, indicating that variety in combat styles was considered important for the entertainment value of the games. Physical evidence from Vulti includes bronze weapons, armor fragments, and ceremonial items associated with funeral rites. Excavations have uncovered short swords with distinctive hilts, bronze helmets with elaborate decorations, and shield bosses that match the equipment depicted in tomb paintings. The quality of these artifacts suggests that funeral combat required significant investment, as the weapons and armor were crafted specifically for these occasions, rather than being repurposed military equipment. The religious significance of blood sacrifice permeated every aspect of Etruscan funeral practices. Their complex mythology described the afterlife as a dangerous realm populated by demons and hostile spirits that could prevent the deceased from reaching their final destination. The Etruscans believed that fresh human blood possessed the power to appease these malevolent entities and provide safe passage for the dead. This belief system created an insatiable demand for human sacrifice during funeral ceremonies, with the most important nobles requiring multiple victims to ensure adequate spiritual protection. Etruscan priests, known as haruspices, played crucial roles in determining the appropriate scale and timing of funeral games. These religious specialists examined the entrails of sacrificed animals to divine the wishes of the deceased and the requirements for successful passage to the afterlife. Their interpretations influenced decisions about how many fighters should participate, what types of combat would be most beneficial, and which specific rituals needed to accompany the bloodshed. The haruspices also supervised the actual combat to ensure that it fulfilled its religious purpose, rather than degenerating into mere entertainment. The connection between Etruscan funeral games and their broader religious practices extended beyond simple blood sacrifice. The Etruscans worshipped a pantheon of underworld deities who demanded regular offerings of human life. Aita, their version of Hades, ruled over the realm of the dead and required tribute from the living to maintain cosmic balance. Thoth, a demon with the head of the vulture and snakes for hair, served as a cyclope who guided souls through the underworld, but only if properly appeased through blood offerings. These religious beliefs created a theological framework that justified and encouraged the practice of funeral combat. Early Etruscan weapons and fighting techniques derived directly from their military traditions and battlefield experiences. Etruscan armies employed a variety of weapons, including short-thrusting swords, javelins, and battle axes, all of which appeared in funeral combat scenarios. The distinctive Etruscan helmet, characterized by its bronze construction and elaborate crest decorations, became a standard piece of gladiatorial equipment. These helmets often featured face guards and neck protection that would later influence Roman gladiatorial armor design. The fighting styles employed in Etruscan funeral games reflected practical military techniques adapted for single combat. Warriors trained in the use of the gladius espanensis, a short sword that would eventually give its name to gladiators themselves. This weapon, measuring approximately 24 inches in length, proved ideal for close-quarters combat and allowed for both thrusting and slashing attacks. The Etruscans paired this sword with various shield types, including the round clipus and the oval scutum, each requiring different fighting techniques and defensive strategies. Etruscan military influence on gladiatorial combat extended to the development of specialized fighting styles based on different ethnic traditions. As Etruscan armies encountered various enemy peoples, they observed and adopted effective weapons and techniques from each culture. GIC warriors contributed long swords and distinctive shield designs, while Samnite fighters introduced the use of javelins and lighter armor. These diverse influences merged within Etruscan funeral games, creating the foundation for the specialized gladiatorial types that would later emerge in Roman arenas. The training of fighters for Etruscan funeral games occurred in facilities that prefigured later Roman gladiatorial schools. Wealthy families maintained private training grounds where condemned prisoners learned basic combat techniques under the supervision of experienced warriors. These early ludi focused on teaching fundamental skills like weapon handling, defensive positioning, and basic attack combinations. The training was necessarily brief, as most fighters faced death within days or weeks of their capture, but it provided sufficient instruction to ensure entertaining combat rather than clumsy slaughter. The social structure surrounding Etruscan funeral games established many precedents that would persist throughout the history of gladiatorial combat. Wealthy families competed with each other to sponsor the most elaborate and memorable funeral games, using these events to display their social status and political influence. The scale of the games became a direct reflection of the family's wealth and importance within Etruscan society, creating pressure for increasingly spectacular displays of violence and extravagance. The transformation of military captives into gladiatorial fighters required a complex system of evaluation and preparation. Etruscan officials assessed prisoners based on their physical condition, fighting experience, and potential entertainment value. Those deemed suitable for arena combat received basic medical treatment to ensure they could fight effectively, while others were relegated to mass executions or sacrificial ceremonies. This selection process established the principle that gladiatorial combat required skilled participants rather than random victims. The geographic spread of Etruscan funeral games throughout central Italy created regional variations in combat styles and religious practices. Northern Etruscan cities like Volterra and Fiestel developed preferences for heavily armored fighters using traditional military equipment, while southern communities near Rome experimented with lighter armor and more mobile fighting techniques. These regional differences contributed to the diversity of gladiatorial types that would later characterize Roman games. The economic impact of Etruscan funeral games extended far beyond the immediate costs of weapons and fighters. Specialized craftsmen emerged to produce gladiatorial equipment, creating an industry that would eventually support thousands of workers throughout the Roman world. Bronzesmiths developed new techniques for creating lightweight yet durable armor, while weapon makers refined the design of swords and shields specifically for arena combat. These economic relationships established the commercial foundation that would sustain gladiatorial games for centuries. The transition from Etruscan sacred ritual to Roman political tool began with a single event that would reshape the ancient world's understanding of public entertainment. In 264 BC, two Roman brothers, Marcus and Decimus Junius Brutus Pera, organized what would become the first recorded munus on Roman soil to honor their recently deceased father. The venue was the Forum Barium, Rome's cattle market, where a temporary wooden arena was constructed to accommodate the spectacle. 3 pairs of fighters engaged in mortal combat, while hundreds of Roman citizens watched from hastily erected wooden benches. Their attention focused not on religious devotion, but on the skill and courage displayed by the combatants. The Brutus brothers' decision to host gladiatorial games marked a calculated political move disguised as filial piety. Marcus Junius Brutus Pera had served as consul in 292 BC and maintained significant political ambitions for his family line. The funeral games provided an opportunity to display the family's wealth, demonstrate their commitment to traditional values, and create a memorable spectacle that would enhance their reputation among Roman voters. Unlike the purely religious Etruscan ceremonies, this Roman adaptation incorporated elements designed to appeal to popular tastes and political sensibilities. The fighters selected for this inaugural Roman munis came from prisoners captured during recent military campaigns against the Samnites and Gauls. Roman military success had provided a steady supply of captives, and the Brutus family chose 6 men based on their fighting experience and physical capabilities. Each pair represented different ethnic backgrounds. One pairing featured 2 GIC warriors armed with their traditional long swords and wooden shields. Another matched Samnite fighters equipped with the distinctive gear of their homeland, while the third combined a Roman deserter against a captured Germanic tribesman. The combat itself followed Etruscan precedents, but incorporated distinctly Roman modifications. Each fight began with the fighters saluting the deceased through a ritual gesture toward his funeral mask, which was prominently displayed near the combat area. The weapons provided included the standard Roman gladius, various shield types, and protective gear that would become characteristic of later gladiatorial equipment. Most significantly, the fights were not predetermined executions, but genuine contests where skill and fortune determined the outcome, allowing some fighters to survive and potentially earn their freedom. The Roman audience's reaction to this first munus exceeded all expectations. Citizens who had initially attended out of curiosity or social obligation found themselves captivated by the intensity of mortal combat. The crowd's emotional investment in the fighter fates created an atmosphere of shared excitement that transcended social boundaries. Patricians and plebeians cheered alongside each other, united in their appreciation for displays of martial skill and personal courage. This popular response immediately suggested the political potential of gladiatorial games as tools for winning public favor. Following the success of the Brutus Games, other prominent Roman families began incorporating gladiatorial combat into their own funeral ceremonies. The practice spread rapidly among the political elite, who recognized the opportunity to outdo their rivals through increasingly elaborate displays. Within 2 decades of the first Roman munis, funeral games had become expected elements of aristocratic burials, with families competing to sponsor the most memorable and spectacular contests. The evolution from private funeral rites to public entertainment accelerated during the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC. As ambitious politicians discovered the electoral advantages of sponsoring gladiatorial games, the Roman system of annual magistres created intense competition among candidates seeking popular support. And gladiatorial games provided an effective means of reaching large numbers of voters simultaneously. Unlike traditional forms of political campaigning, which relied on personal connections and patronage networks, gladiatorial spectacles appealed directly to the masses and created lasting impressions of generosity and magnificence. Marcus Aemilius Carus exemplified this new approach to political advancement when he sponsored elaborate gladiatorial games during his campaign for the consulship in 115 BC. Scaurus imported fighters from across the Mediterranean, including exotic combatants from Africa and Asia, who fought with unfamiliar weapons and techniques. The games lasted for 3 consecutive days and featured over 50 individual contests, establishing a new standard for political spectacle. Scaurus' victory in the consular elections was attributed largely to the popularity generated by his gladiatorial games, demonstrating their effectiveness as campaign tools. The role of the editor or sponsor of gladiatorial games became increasingly important as these events grew in scale and political significance. The editor bore complete responsibility for organizing, financing, and presenting the games, making crucial decisions about the number of fighters, the quality of equipment, and the duration of the spectacle. Successful editors developed reputations for generosity and good judgment, while those who sponsored disappointing games faced public ridicule and political consequences. The financial burden of sponsoring gladiatorial games created both opportunities and risks for ambitious politicians. Wealthy families could leverage their resources to stage spectacular events that generated enormous popular goodwill, but the costs involved could bankrupt less fortunate candidates. A single day of quality gladiatorial games might cost the equivalent of several years' income for a moderately wealthy Roman, forcing many politicians to mortgage their estates or borrow extensively to finance their spectacles. This economic pressure intensified competition among the elite and contributed to the growing extravagance of Roman political culture. The transformation of gladiatorial games from funeral rites to political tools required significant modifications to their organization and presentation. While maintaining the religious justification of honoring the dead, editors began scheduling games to coincide with electoral campaigns, religious festivals, and other politically advantageous occasions. The timing of games became as important as their content, with sponsors carefully calculating the optimal moment to maximize their political impact. The venues for gladiatorial games expanded beyond the traditional funeral settings to accommodate large audiences and more elaborate spectacles. Temporary wooden amphitheaters were constructed in various locations throughout Rome, including the Campus Martius, the Forum Romanum, and purpose-built sites on the outskirts of the city. These structures featured increasingly sophisticated designs with multiple tiers of seating, protective barriers between the audience and combatants, and underground facilities for housing fighters and equipment. The professionalization of gladiatorial training emerged as a natural response to the growing demand for skilled fighters. The early system of using untrained prisoners and condemned criminals proved inadequate for providing the quality of combat that Roman audiences expected. Wealthy families and professional entrepreneurs began establishing formal training schools known as ludi, where fighters received systematic instruction in weapons handling, combat techniques, and arena performance. The Lanesta system developed as the organizational framework for professional gladiatorial training. These entrepreneur trainers purchased slaves, prisoners, and volunteers to create stable rosters of fighters who could be hired out to editors for specific games. The most successful Lanista operated multiple schools and maintained hundreds of gladiators, developing reputations for producing fighters of exceptional skill and entertainment value. The Lanista Ganias Cornelius Lentulus Batiatus, who would later become infamous for his association with Spartacus, exemplified this new breed of professional gladiatorial entrepreneur. The training regimen within gladiatorial schools combined military discipline with specialized combat instruction. New recruits underwent intensive physical conditioning to build strength, endurance, and agility required for arena combat. They learned to fight with various weapon combinations, mastering the techniques associated with different gladiatorial types. The training included not only combat skills, but also performance elements designed to entertain audiences, such as dramatic gestures, crowd interaction, and theatrical presentations of courage or defiance. The development of standardized gladiatorial types reflected the professionalization of the industry and the desire to create varied and predictable entertainment. The Samnite gladiator fought with traditional Italian equipment, including a large rectangular shield, short sword, and distinctive helmet with a high crest. The Thrax carried the curved sword and small round shield characteristic of Thracian warriors, while the Gaul wielded the long sword and oval shield of Celtic fighters. Each type required specialized training and appealed to different audience preferences, allowing editors to create diverse programs that maintained spectator interest. The economic structure of the gladiatorial industry became increasingly complex as the scale and frequency of games expanded. Professional Anista invested heavily in training facilities, equipment, and fighter acquisition, expecting to recover their costs through rental fees charged to game sponsors. The most valuable gladiators commanded premium prices, while novice fighters could be hired relatively cheaply. This pricing structure created incentives for Lanisti to develop their fighters' skills and reputations, leading to higher quality performances and more entertaining spectacles. The legal status of gladiators reflected the complex social dynamics surrounding the profession. Most fighters were slaves who had no legal rights and could be bought, sold, or killed at their owner's discretion. However, some gladiators were free volunteers who entered the profession voluntarily, often motivated by financial desperation or the desire for fame. These octarati signed contracts that temporarily surrendered their legal rights in exchange for payment, creating a unique legal category that combined elements of slavery and free employment. The relationship between gladiators and Roman society involved both fascination and contempt. While audiences admired skilled fighters and celebrated their victories, gladiators remained social outcasts who were denied many basic rights and privileges of Roman citizenship. They could not vote, hold public office, or marry into respectable families, regardless of their fame or success in the arena. This social stigma created a paradox where the most popular entertainers in Rome occupied the lowest rungs of the social hierarchy. The medical care provided to gladiators represented one of the most advanced aspects of ancient healthcare. Professional gladiatorial schools employed skilled physicians who specialized in treating combat injuries and maintaining fighter health. These doctors developed innovative surgical techniques, pain management methods, and rehabilitation programs that often surpassed the medical care available to ordinary Roman citizens. The economic value of trained gladiators justified this investment in medical care, as healthy fighters generated more revenue than injured or deceased ones. The dietary requirements of gladiators differed significantly from typical Roman nutrition, emphasizing foods that would build strength and endurance while maintaining optimal fighting weight. Gladiatorial schools provided high-protein diets featuring meat, fish, eggs, and dairy products supplemented with grains, vegetables, and specialized training foods. The quality of gladiatorial nutrition often exceeded that available to free Roman citizens, reflecting the economic importance of maintaining fighter health and performance capabilities. The psychological aspects of gladiatorial training involved preparing fighters to face death with courage and dignity, while maintaining the will to fight for survival. Trainers employed various techniques to build mental toughness, including exposure to combat situations, philosophical instruction about honor and duty, and religious ceremonies designed to prepare fighters for potential death. The most successful gladiators developed a professional attitude toward their dangerous occupation, treating each fight as a job to be performed with skill and professionalism, rather than an emotional crisis. The influence of gladiatorial games on Roman political culture extended far beyond their immediate entertainment value. The expectation that political candidates would sponsor games created pressure for increasingly elaborate spectacles, driving up the costs of political careers and limiting opportunities for less wealthy citizens. This dynamic contributed to the concentration of political power among the wealthy elite and reduced the democratic character of the Roman Republic. The geographic expansion of gladiatorial games throughout the Roman territories followed the patterns of political and military conquest. As Roman influence spread across the Mediterranean, local elites in conquered territories adopted gladiatorial games as symbols of their integration into Roman culture and their loyalty to Roman values. This cultural transmission helped establish gladiatorial combat as a unifying element of Roman civilization, creating shared experiences and expectations across diverse populations and regions. The sophisticated gladiatorial system that emerged during the late Republican period represented far more than random violence. It constituted a carefully orchestrated ballet of death, where each fighter's role was precisely defined by their equipment, training, and tactical approach. The evolution from crude funeral combats to refined arena spectacles required the development of specialized gladiatorial types, each designed to exploit specific advantages while creating vulnerabilities that opponents could target. This systematic approach to combat entertainment reached its pinnacle in the strategic pairing of gladiators, whose contrasting styles generated maximum dramatic tension and tactical complexity. The most iconic and strategically sophisticated matchup in gladiatorial history pitted the retiarius against the secular, a pairing that embodied the fundamental tension between mobility and protection, range and power. The retiarius, literally netman, entered the arena virtually naked except for a subliculum and a protective manner covering his left arm and shoulder. His primary weapons included a weighted net approximately 12 feet square with lead weights sewn into its edges, a three-pronged trident measuring roughly 6 feet in length, and a curved dagger worn at his belt as a backup weapon. This minimal equipment loadout prioritized speed, agility, and reach over defensive protection. The retiarius fighting technique centered on maintaining distance while using his net to entangle and disable his opponent. The weighted edges of the net could deliver stunning blows when swung with sufficient force, while the mesh itself could trap weapons, limbs, or entire opponents if deployed skillfully. The trident served multiple tactical purposes. Its long reach allowed the retiarios to maintain safe distance while probusing for openings. Its three prongs could catch and deflect incoming sword strikes, and its sharp points could inflict serious wounds if the opponent became entangled or exposed. The curved dagger provided a last resort for close-quarters combat when the primary weapons proved ineffective. The tactical approach of the retiarios required exceptional footwork and spatial awareness. These fighters trained extensively in lateral movement, backpedaling, and rapid directional changes to avoid their opponent's charges while maintaining optimal striking distance. The most skilled ratias could cast their nets with remarkable accuracy, targeting specific body parts or weapon arms to create immediate tactical advantages. The net's recovery after a missed throw demanded split-second timing, as the fighter had to retrieve his primary weapon while defending himself with only the trident and dagger. The seeker, whose name meant pursuer or chaser, was specifically designed to counter the ratius's tactical advantages through heavy armor and aggressive pursuit tactics. The seeker's helmet represented a masterpiece of functional design. Its smooth, rounded surface featured minimal protrusions that could catch a net, while small eye holes limited peripheral vision but prevented trident prongs from penetrating the face guard. The helmet's distinctive fish-scale crest served both decorative and practical purposes, deflecting net weights while allowing some airflow for cooling. The secular's body armor included a heavy rectangular shield measuring approximately 4 feet in height and 2.5 feet in width. Constructed from laminated wood strips covered with leather and reinforced with metal edging. This shield provided comprehensive protection for the torso and legs while serving as an offensive weapon for shield punches and battering attacks. The fighter wore a mainer on his sword arm, padded leg protection on his left leg, and carried a short gladius optimized for thrusting attacks in close quarters. The strategic dynamic between Retiarius and Secutor created a compelling tactical puzzle that varied with each encounter. The SEC's primary objective involved closing distance quickly while avoiding or deflecting net attacks, then using his superior armor and close-quarters weaponry to overwhelm his likely protected opponent. This required aggressive forward movement combined with defensive shield work to deflect trident strikes and avoid net entanglement. Successful secutors developed techniques for cutting or tearing nets with their sword edges while advancing, turning the Retiarius' primary weapon into a liability. The Retiarius countered these tactics through superior mobility and range management, using the arena's space to maintain optimal fighting distance while wearing down his heavily armored opponent. The weight of the secular's equipment created endurance disadvantages that skilled retiari could exploit through prolonged engagements. These fighters learned to target exposed areas like the sword arm, neck, or legs with precise trident strikes while using their net to control the pace and distance of combat. The heavily armored gladiatorial types represented a different tactical philosophy, emphasizing protection and close-quarters combat over mobility and range. The Milo derived his name from the distinctive fish-shaped crest adorning his helmet, which featured a broad brim to deflect downward strikes and a face guard with adequate eye holes for peripheral vision. The Mamino's equipment closely resembled that of a Roman legionary, including the large rectangular scutum, short gladius, and comprehensive arm and leg protection. This gladiatorial type appealed to Roman audiences' military pride and represented the citizen-soldier ideal in arena combat. The Milo fighting style emphasized disciplined shield work and systematic sword techniques derived from Roman military training. These fighters excelled at defensive positioning, using their large shields to create protected zones while probing for openings with measured sword strikes. The Milo's training included formation fighting techniques adapted for single combat, such as shield binding and systematic advance patterns that maintained defensive integrity while closing distance. The tactical approach of the Mamia relied heavily on endurance and methodical pressure, rather than explosive attacks or dramatic maneuvers. These fighters trained to maintain consistent performance throughout extended combats, using their superior protection to absorb punishment, while gradually wearing down opponents through accumulated damage. The Milo's sword work emphasized thrusting attacks delivered from behind shield cover, targeting vital areas with precise economical movements that conserved energy while maximizing damage potential. The Thrax, representing the fighting traditions of Thrace, presented a markedly different tactical profile, despite similar levels of armor protection. The Thrax helmet featured a distinctive griffin or sphinx crest and a wide brim design that provided excellent protection against overhead strikes. The most characteristic element of Thrax equipment was the curved Thracian sword, which measured approximately 2 feet in length and featured a pronounced forward curve that concentrated cutting power while allowing strikes around shield edges. The Thrax carried a small square or round shield that measured roughly 2 feet in diameter, significantly smaller than the Mermillo's scutum. This reduced shield size reflected the Thrax's emphasis on offensive action and mobility over purely defensive tactics. The fighter wore high greaves extending above the knee on both legs, providing comprehensive lower body protection that compensated for the smaller shield's reduced coverage. The fighting techniques employed by the Thrax exploited the curved sword's unique properties through slashing attacks that could bypass conventional shield defenses. The weapon's design allowed for hooking motions that could pull aside opponents' shields or catch weapon arms, creating openings for follow-up strikes. The Threx trained extensively in close-quarters grappling and weapon binding, using the curved sword's shape to trap and control opponents' weapons while delivering decisive strikes. The tactical philosophy of the Thrax emphasized aggressive offensive action, supported by superior mobility and weapon versatility. These fighters excelled at creating and exploiting momentary openings through rapid combinations of strikes, feints, and positional changes. The smaller shield required exceptional timing and spatial awareness, as Threx fighters had to actively intercept attacks rather than relying on passive protection. This active defensive approach allowed for immediate counterattacks, but demanded higher skill levels and reaction times. The Hoplomachus represented the Greek military tradition within the Roman arena system. Equipped with a spear as his primary weapon, supplemented by a short sword for close-quarters combat, the Hoplomachus helmet featured a distinctive crest and face protection. Similar to Greek hoplite equipment, while his small round shield measured approximately 3 feet in diameter, high greaves protected both legs and a maner covered the weapon arm, creating comprehensive protection for a fighter whose tactics relied on maintaining optimal spear range. The spear techniques employed by the Hoplomachus drew directly from Greek phalanx fighting traditions, adapted for single combat. These fighters trained in various spear grips and attack angles, using the weapon's 8-oot length to control distance while delivering powerful thrusting attacks. The spear's versatility allowed for sweeping strikes against opponents' legs, overhead attacks, targeting the head and shoulders, and defensive techniques that could deflect or bind opponents' weapons. The tactical challenges facing the Hoplomachus centered on managing the transition between spear and sword combat when opponents successfully closed distance. These fighters developed sophisticated techniques for using their shield and spear together, creating defensive barriers while maintaining offensive capabilities. The most skilled Hoplomachi could seamlessly transition between weapons, using the spear shaft for close-quarter strikes and grappling while drawing their sword for final combat phases. The specialized gladiatorial categories represented the arena system's capacity for innovation and spectacle beyond traditional infantry combat. The equites brought mounted warfare into the amphitheater, fighting on horseback with spears, swords, and small round shields. These contests typically began with mounted phases where fighters engaged in cavalry tactics, including charging attacks, wheeling maneuvers, and projectile exchanges. The confined space of most arenas limited the tactical options available to mounted fighters, often forcing them to dismount and continue combat on foot using modified infantry techniques. The equipment and training requirements for equites exceeded those of other gladiatorial types due to the complexity of mounted combat. These fighters needed exceptional horsemanship skills combined with weapons proficiency, as controlling a horse while engaging in combat demanded years of specialized training. The horses themselves required conditioning for arena combat, becoming accustomed to crowds, noise, and the stress of violent encounters. The most valuable equites developed partnerships with specific horses, creating mounted teams that could execute complex tactical maneuvers with precision timing. The Acidari recreated British chariot warfare within Roman arenas, providing audiences with exotic combat spectacles that showcased the military traditions of recently conquered territories. These fighters operated two-man chariots with one individual serving as driver, while the other fought with spears, swords, and shields. The tactical complexity of chariot combat required exceptional coordination between team members, as the driver's skill directly influenced the fighter's tactical options and survival chances. The chariot fighting techniques employed by Acidari included high-speed passes with spear attacks, ramming maneuvers designed to overturn opponents' chariots, and dismounted combat when chariots became disabled or tactical situations required ground fighting. The confined arena space created unique tactical challenges for chariot fighters, who had to execute complex maneuvers within limited areas while avoiding arena barriers and maintaining combat effectiveness. The training regimen for I encompassed both individual fighting skills and team coordination exercises. Drivers practiced precise maneuvering under combat conditions, learning to position their chariots for optimal attack angles while avoiding opponent strikes and maintaining vehicle control. Fighters developed techniques for combat from moving platforms, including balance training that allowed effective weapon use while standing in bouncing turning chariots. The dimmer represented the ultimate expression of offensive gladiatorial combat, fighting with two swords simultaneously instead of using a shield for protection. These fighters wore minimal armor, typically limited to arm guards and leg protection, relying entirely on weapon skill and mobility for survival. The dual sword fighting style required exceptional ambidextrous training, as fighters had to coordinate attacks and defenses with both hands while maintaining proper footwork and positioning. The weapons employed by Dimera's fighters varied depending on their specific training and tactical preferences. Some used match pairs of gladi, while others combined different sword types to create varied attack patterns and tactical options. The most skilled dimmer fighters could execute simultaneous attacks with both weapons, creating offensive combinations that overwhelmed opponents' defensive capabilities through sheer volume and complexity of strikes. The tactical approach of the dimmer emphasized constant offensive pressure, combined with superior mobility to avoid counterattacks. These fighters trained extensively in combination attacks, using one sword to bind or deflect opponents' weapons while striking with the other. The absence of shield protection required exceptional timing and spatial awareness, as any defensive mistake could result in immediate and fatal consequences. The strategic pairing of different gladiatorial types created the dramatic tension that made arena combats compelling entertainment for Roman audiences. The matchmaking process considered not only the tactical interactions between different fighting styles, but also the entertainment value of specific combinations and the relative skill levels of individual fighters. The most popular pairings created clear tactical narratives that audiences could follow and appreciate, such as the classic confrontation between mobility and protection, or the clash between offensive aggression and defensive discipline. The editor's selection of gladiatorial pairings reflected sophisticated understanding of combat dynamics and audience psychology. Successful matchups balanced competitive equality with tactical interest, ensuring that both fighters had realistic chances of victory while creating compelling strategic situations. The most memorable contests often featured fighters whose styles created natural dramatic tension, forcing both combatants to adapt their tactics and demonstrate their full range of skills. The evolution of gladiatorial pairing strategies reflected the increasing sophistication of arena entertainment and the growing expertise of lanisti and editors in creating compelling spectacles. Early Republican games featured relatively simple matchups, based primarily on ethnic or regional fighting traditions, while later contests incorporated complex tactical considerations and psychological factors, designed to maximize audience engagement and emotional investment in the outcomes. The transformation of gladiatorial combat from temporary wooden stages to permanent stone monuments began with the recognition that these spectacles had become essential elements of Roman political and social life. The construction of the Flavian amphitheater, known today as the Colosseum, represented the culmination of centuries of architectural evolution and engineering innovation that turned arena entertainment into a precise science of crowd management, theatrical presentation, and mechanical sophistication. The Flavian amphitheater's construction commenced under Emperor Vespasian around 70 AD on the site of Nero's artificial lake within the Domus Aurea complex. This location choice carried profound political symbolism. The despised emperor's private pleasure ground would be transformed into a public venue where ordinary Roman citizens could witness spectacular entertainment. The project required draining the lake, excavating foundations to a depth of approximately 40 feet below ground level, and establishing a complex system of drainage channels that would prevent flooding during Rome's frequent winter rains. The amphitheater's elliptical design measured 620 feet in length, 513 feet in width, and rose to a height of 157 feet through 4 distinct architectural stories. The exterior facade employed a systematic arrangement of architectural orders. Doric columns on the ground level, Ionic on the second story, and Corinthian on the third, with Corinthian pilasters adorning the fourth level. This progression created visual harmony while demonstrating Roman mastery of Greek architectural principles adapted for their own monumental purposes. The structural engineering of the Flavian amphitheater relied on innovative load-bearing techniques that distributed the enormous weight of the building through a complex system of radial walls, barrel vaults, and cross vaults constructed from Roman concrete. The foundation consisted of massive travertine blocks quarried from Tivoli, while the upper levels employed lighter tufer stone and brick to reduce overall structural stress. The extensive use of concrete allowed for the creation of large interior spaces without requiring dense forests of supporting columns that would have obstructed sightlines. The arena floor itself measured approximately 287 feet by 180 feet, and was covered with wooden flooring overlaid with sand to absorb blood and provide secure footing for combatants. Beneath this surface lay the hypergam, an elaborate underground complex that represented perhaps the most sophisticated piece of ancient entertainment technology ever constructed. This subterranean maze extended 2 levels below the arena floor and contained an intricate network of corridors, chambers, storage areas, and mechanical systems designed to support the complex logistics of gladiatorial games. The Hypergeum's design incorporated 32 animal lifts strategically positioned around the arena perimeter, each capable of raising wild beasts, gladiators, or elaborate stage sets from the underground chambers to arena level through trapdoors concealed beneath the sand. These lifts operated through a counterweight system that allowed relatively small numbers of workers to raise extremely heavy loads with precise timing. The most sophisticated lifts could elevate entire stage sets, complete with artificial trees, rocks, and architectural elements to create elaborate hunting scenarios or mythological tableaux. The underground chambers of the Hippaiam included specialized holding areas for different categories of performers and animals. Gladiators awaited their contests in secure cells equipped with basic amenities, while exotic animals occupied reinforced cages designed to contain everything from lions and tigers to elephants and rhinoceros. The animal holding areas featured sophisticated drainage systems, feeding mechanisms, and ventilation shafts that maintained adequate air quality in the confined underground spaces. The mechanical systems within the Hypergeum extended beyond simple lifts to include complex stage machinery capable of creating dramatic scenic effects. Retractable barriers could be raised or lowered to divide the arena into separate combat zones. While concealed water channels allowed for the flooding of portions of the arena floor for now, machier or naval battle recreations, the engineering challenges of creating watertight seals at the required scale demanded innovative solutions using lead sheets, hydraulic cement, and precisely fitted stone joints. The arena's capacity to stage nakier represented one of its most impressive technical achievements. These naval battle recreations required flooding the arena to a depth sufficient for small warships, while maintaining structural integrity and ensuring adequate drainage afterward. The water supply came from a dedicated aqueduct branch that could deliver thousands of gallons per minute, while drainage occurred through large outlets connected to Rome's sewer system. The logistics of bringing actual warships into the arena required disassembling vessels outside the amphitheater, transporting the components through the underground passages, and reassembling them within the flooded arena. The seating arrangement within the Flavian amphitheater reflected and reinforced Roman social hierarchy through a carefully structured system that placed each spectator according to their social status and legal standing. The podium, the lowest seating tier, was reserved for senators, magistrates, and other high-ranking officials who occupied marble seats with individual armrests and back supports. This section featured the imperial box, an elaborate marble pavilion where the emperor and his immediate family watched the games while protected by Praetorian guards and separated from the general population. The manum primum contained seats for the equestrian class, wealthy citizens who met specific property requirements but lacked senatorial rank. These wooden seats with basic cushions provided excellent views of the arena while maintaining clear social distinction from the senatorial section below. The equestrian section included reserved areas for specific groups, such as military tribunes, wealthy freedmen, and foreign dignitaries whose status warranted special recognition, but who remained outside the formal Roman aristocracy. The Minanum Secundum accommodated ordinary Roman citizens, divided into lower and upper sections, based on economic status and social standing. The lower portion housed prosperous plebeians, skilled craftsmen, and successful merchants who could afford better seats, while the upper section contained poorer citizens who received free admission but occupied the least desirable viewing positions. The wooden benches in these sections lacked individual armrests and provided minimal comfort during the lengthy programs that could extend from dawn to dusk. The manam sum at the amphitheater's highest level was reserved for women, slaves, and foreigners who were permitted to attend, but occupied the most distant seats from the action. This section included a separate area for women of senatorial and equestrian families who were segregated from men but maintained their social distinctions even within the gender-restricted seating. The architectural design ensured that even these distant seats provided adequate views of the arena, though the details of individual combats became difficult to distinguish from such heights. The legal framework governing amphitheater seating arrangements stemmed from Augustus' Lex Julia Theatralis, which codified social distinctions within entertainment venues and established penalties for violations of seating protocols. This legislation designated specific sections for different social classes, while creating enforcement mechanisms that included fines, public humiliation, and temporary banishment from games for those who attempted to occupy seats above their station. The law's provisions extended beyond simple social ranking to address more complex situations involving mixed marriages, freed slaves, and foreign visitors whose status required careful evaluation. The enforcement of seating regulations required a substantial administrative apparatus that included ushers, guards, and officials responsible for verifying spectators' credentials and directing them to appropriate sections. These personnel wore distinctive uniforms that identified their authority and carried documentation that established each spectator's seating entitlement. The system's complexity increased during major festivals when attendance swelled beyond normal capacity and temporary seating arrangements required additional oversight and crowd control measures. The amphitheater's crowd control systems extended beyond seating arrangements to encompass entry and exit procedures designed to manage the movement of up to 50,000 spectators safely and efficiently. The building featured 80 ground-level entrances, each numbered and designated for specific seating sections to prevent confusion and overcrowding. The entrance system allowed the entire amphitheater to fill or empty within approximately 15 minutes. A remarkable achievement given the era's limited understanding of crowd dynamics and the absence of modern safety protocols. The regional amphitheaters constructed throughout the Roman Empire adapted the Flavian amphitheater's innovations to local conditions, resources, and audience sizes, while maintaining the essential features that defined Roman arena entertainment. The amphitheater at Capua, traditionally considered the birthplace of gladiatorial schools, predated the Colosseum by several decades and served as a testing ground for many architectural and mechanical innovations later incorporated into the Roman structure. The Capuan amphitheater measured approximately 560 feet by 460 feet, making it the second largest in the Roman world after the Flavian amphitheater. Its underground complex, while less elaborate than Rome's hyperam, included animal holding areas, gladiator preparation chambers, and mechanical lifts capable of delivering performers and stage elements to the arena floor. The building's proximity to major gladiatorial schools made it a natural venue for training exhibitions and professional development opportunities for fighters preparing for careers in larger venues. The amphitheater at Pompeii, preserved by the volcanic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD, provides the most complete archaeological evidence of provincial arena construction and operation. Built around 70 BC, this structure represents one of the earliest permanent stone amphitheaters and demonstrates the rapid spread of gladiatorial architecture throughout Roman territories. The building's capacity of approximately 20,000 spectators served a city population of roughly 15,000, indicating that games drew audiences from surrounding communities and represented major regional entertainment events. The Pompeian amphitheater's design reflected local adaptations of Roman architectural principles, including the use of natural hillside contours to reduce construction costs and provide stable foundations for the seating tiers. The arena floor measured 230 feet by 115 feet. Smaller than major metropolitan venues, but adequate for the standard range of gladiatorial contests and animal hunts. The underground areas, while limited compared to later developments, included basic holding facilities and storage areas that supported the logistical requirements of provincial games. The social dynamics revealed by Pompeian graffiti and inscriptions provide insights into the cultural impact of gladiatorial games on provincial communities. Spectators carved names of favorite gladiators into seats, recorded memorable contests, and expressed opinions about specific fighters' skills and attractiveness. These informal records demonstrate that gladiatorial culture penetrated deeply into local society, creating shared experiences and common reference points that transcended social and economic boundaries. The amphitheater at Nemours in southern Gaul exemplifies the adaptation of Roman arena architecture to provincial conditions and the integration of gladiatorial entertainment into Celtic cultural traditions. Constructed during the late 1st century AD, this building served the capital of the Nemesis territory and provided a venue where Romanized GIC elites could demonstrate their cultural sophistication and political loyalty through sponsorship of traditional Roman spectacles. The Nemesis Amphitheater's architectural features combined Roman engineering techniques with local building materials and construction methods. The exterior facade employed local limestone quarried from nearby deposits, while the interior utilized Roman concrete and brick construction for structural elements requiring maximum strength and durability. The building's capacity of approximately 24,000 spectators made it one of the largest provincial amphitheaters and reflected the prosperity and population density of the surrounding region. The arena at El in North Africa represents the pinnacle of provincial amphitheater construction and demonstrates the extent to which gladiatorial culture had penetrated even the most remote corners of the Roman Empire. Built during the 3rd century AD, this massive structure rivaled the Flavian amphitheater in size and sophistication, while serving the relatively modest city of Tyrus in modern Tunisia. The LGM amphitheater's dimensions of 492 feet by 407 feet and capacity of approximately 35,000 spectators created a venue that could accommodate audiences drawn from across North Africa. The building's construction required importing specialized craftsmen and materials from across the Mediterranean, demonstrating the economic resources available to provincial elites and their commitment to maintaining Roman cultural standards even in distant territories. The underground complex at LDM included sophisticated animal handling facilities designed to accommodate the exotic African wildlife that formed a major attraction of North African Games. These chambers featured specialized cages for lions, leopards, elephants, and other dangerous animals, along with the mechanical systems necessary to deliver them to the arena floor safely and dramatically. The engineering challenges of creating secure animal facilities in the desert climate required innovative ventilation and cooling systems that maintained adequate conditions for both animals and human workers. The innovative features developed across the network of Roman amphitheaters included retractable awning systems, known as valeria, that provided shade and weather protection for spectators. These massive canvas covers required complex rigging systems operated by teams of sailors borrowed from the Roman Navy, whose experience with ship sails translated directly to managing the amphitheater's fabric roof. The Valerium at the Flavian Amphitheater employed 240 wooden masts and required a crew of approximately 1,000 men to deploy and adjust according to weather conditions and sun angles. The water systems integrated into major amphitheaters extended beyond simple drainage to include decorative fountains, drinking facilities, and the infrastructure necessary for nomatio presentations. These hydraulic networks required sophisticated engineering that balanced water pressure, flow rates, and drainage capacity while maintaining structural integrity and preventing flooding during heavy rains or mechanical failures. The amphitheaters that had become symbols of Roman power and entertainment would witness their most dramatic challenge not from external enemies, but from the very performers who had filled them with blood and spectacle. The Third Civil War erupted in the spring of 73 BC at the gladiatorial school of Lentulus Batiotus in Capua, transforming what began as a desperate escape attempt into the largest slave rebellion in Roman history. The revolt's origins lay in the harsh conditions and brutal treatment that characterized even the most prestigious gladiatorial establishments, where fighters trained under constant threat of death while generating enormous profits for their owners. Lenterus Bateatus operated one of Capua's most successful gladiatorial schools, housing approximately 200 fighters in a fortified compound that combined training facilities, living quarters, and security measures designed to prevent escapes. The school's reputation rested on its ability to produce skilled gladiators who commanded premium prices in arenas throughout southern Italy. Batiotus invested heavily in equipment, training, and medical care for his fighters. But this business-minded approach coexisted with the fundamental reality that gladiators remained property to be exploited, punished, and ultimately sacrificed for entertainment. The conditions within Petitus' school reflected the contradictions inherent in the gladiatorial system. Fighters received adequate nutrition, professional medical care, and systematic combat training that often exceeded the preparation available to Roman soldiers. However, they lived under constant surveillance, faced severe punishments for minor infractions, and knew that their survival depended entirely on their ability to entertain audiences who viewed them as expendable performers. The psychological pressure of this existence, combined with the physical demands of constant training and periodic combat, created an environment where desperation and resentment fed beneath the surface of apparent prosperity. Spartacus emerged as the rebellion's primary leader through a combination of military experience, personal charisma, and tactical intelligence that distinguished him from his fellow gladiators. Historical sources describe him as a Thracian who had served in the Roman auxiliary forces before being captured and enslaved. Though the exact circumstances of his enslavement remain unclear, his military background provided crucial knowledge of Roman tactical methods, organizational structures, and strategic thinking that would prove invaluable in transforming a prison break into a sustained military campaign. The initial escape plan involved approximately 70 gladiators who had been selected for execution or particularly harsh punishment, making the situation desperate enough to justify the enormous risks of rebellion. The conspirators included fighters from various ethnic backgrounds and gladiatorial specializations, creating a diverse group with different combat skills and military experiences. Crixus, a Greek gladiator known for his skill as a Milo, brought knowledge of Celtic warfare tactics and experience fighting against Roman forces in Gaul. Uninameus, another GIC fighter, contributed additional military expertise and helped coordinate the diverse group of rebels during the crucial early stages of the revolt. The escape itself occurred when the gladiators overpowered their guards during a training session, seizing weapons from the school's armory and fighting their way out of the compound. The rebels initially armed themselves with gladiatorial equipment, including swords, shields, and armor, but quickly supplemented these weapons with kitchen knives, tools, and improvised weapons that provided additional combat capability. The successful breakout required precise timing and coordination, as the gladiators had to neutralize multiple guard positions simultaneously while preventing any survivors from raising alarms that could bring immediate Roman military response. The immediate aftermath of the escape demonstrated the rebels' understanding that their survival depended on rapid expansion and strategic mobility, rather than attempting to hold fixed positions. The gladiators moved quickly to Mount Vuvius, approximately 20 meters southeast of Capua, where the volcanic terrain provided natural defensive advantages and multiple escape routes if Roman forces attempted to surround them. The mountain slopes offered caves for shelter, springs for water, and elevated positions that allowed the rebels to observe approaching enemies while remaining concealed from Roman scouts. The rebels' initial military strategy focused on guerrilla warfare tactics that exploited their superior knowledge of local terrain and their opponents' overconfidence. Spartacus and his fellow leaders recognized that direct confrontation with Roman legions would result in immediate defeat. So they adopted hit-and-run tactics designed to inflict casualties while avoiding decisive battles. These operations targeted isolated Roman patrols, supply convoys, and small garrisons, allowing the rebels to acquire additional weapons and equipment while demonstrating their military capabilities to potential recruits. The recruitment of additional followers occurred through a combination of military success and appeals to the widespread discontent among slaves, rural laborers, and dispossessed farmers throughout southern Italy. The rebels' victories against Roman forces created a reputation for invincibility that attracted desperate individuals seeking escape from poverty, debt, or slavery. The gladiators' professional military skills and proven combat effectiveness provided credibility that distinguished this rebellion from previous slave uprisings that had been quickly suppressed by Roman authorities. The composition of Spartacus' army evolved rapidly from its gladiatorial origins to encompass a diverse coalition of the dispossessed and marginalized. Rural slaves who worked on large agricultural estates formed the largest single group of recruits, bringing knowledge of local geography and supply sources along with deep resentment against their Roman masters. Shepherds and herdsmen contributed mobility and familiarity with mountain terrain, while urban slaves provided technical skills and intelligence about Roman military preparations and political responses to the rebellion. The rebels' military organization reflected Spartacus' understanding of Roman tactical principles adapted for a regular warfare. The army was divided into specialized units based on ethnic background and combat experience, allowing each group to fight according to their traditional methods while maintaining overall coordination. GIC and Germanic fighters formed heavy infantry units armed with captured Roman equipment, while Thracian and other Balkan fighters specialized in light infantry tactics, emphasizing mobility and harassment. Former gladiators served as elite shock troops, whose professional combat skills provided crucial advantages in close quarters fighting. The tactical innovations employed by Spartacus' forces demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both conventional and irregular warfare principles. The rebels developed techniques for coordinating multiple small units in complex operations, using signal systems and predetermined rally points to maintain communication across extended battlefields. They perfected ambush tactics that maximized casualties while minimizing their own exposure, often using decoy forces to lure Roman units into prepared killing zones where concealed fighters could attack from multiple directions simultaneously. The rebels' success in several early engagements against Roman forces sent shockwaves through the Republic's political establishment and demonstrated the serious military threat posed by the uprising. The defeat of Priagas Claudius Glaber's forces on Mount Vuvius provided the rebellion's first major victory and established Spartacus' reputation as a capable military commander. Glaber had positioned his troops to blockade the mountain's main access routes, confident that the rebels could be starved into submission without requiring direct assault. However, Spartacus' forces descended the mountain's steep rear slopes using ropes woven from vine branches, circling behind the Roman positions, and launching a surprise attack that routed Glaber's unprepared troops. This victory provided the rebels with substantial quantities of military equipment, including professional weapons, armor, and supplies, that transformed them from desperate fugitives into a legitimate military force. The captured equipment allowed Spartacus to arm additional recruits with standardized weapons, while providing his core gladiatorial fighters with superior gear that enhanced their already formidable combat capabilities. The psychological impact of defeating a Roman Pria resonated throughout southern Italy, encouraging additional slaves and dispossessed farmers to join the rebellion, while demonstrating that Roman military power was not invincible. The defeat of Pritolus Renius's larger force near Mount Vuvius confirmed the rebels' military competence and forced Roman authorities to recognize the seriousness of the threat. Venius had assembled a more substantial army, including regular legionary units and auxiliary forces, confident that professional Roman troops could easily defeat a rabble of escaped slaves. However, Spartacus' tactical acumen and his followers' desperate motivation proved superior to Roman overconfidence and conventional tactics. The rebels used their superior mobility to avoid direct confrontation, while launching coordinated attacks against isolated Roman detachments, gradually wearing down Venius's forces through accumulated casualties and demoralization. The expansion of the rebellion throughout southern Italy during 73 and 72 BC demonstrated the widespread social tensions and economic grievances that the slave uprising had unleashed. The rebels' military successes encouraged slave revolts on individual estates, urban uprisings in several cities, and the emergence of bandit groups that claimed affiliation with Spartacus' movement. This broader pattern of unrest threatened the stability of Roman rule throughout the region and forced authorities to divert substantial military resources from other priorities to address the growing crisis. The internal dynamics within the rebel army revealed tensions between different strategic approaches and long-term objectives that would ultimately contribute to the rebellion's failure. Spartacus advocated for a strategic withdrawal from Italy, arguing that the rebels should cross the Alps and return to their homelands, where they could live as free men beyond Roman reach. This approach reflected his understanding that the rebellion could not ultimately defeat the full military power of the Roman Republic, and that survival required escaping Roman territory entirely. Crix and many of the GIC fighters disagreed with Spartacus' strategic assessment, preferring to remain in Italy, where they could continue inflicting damage on Roman interests while recruiting additional followers. The Gauls' decision reflected both their confidence in their military capabilities and their desire for revenge against Roman oppression. This strategic disagreement led to a division of the rebel army, with Crixus leading approximately 30,000 followers in continued operations throughout southern Italy, while Spartacus moved north with the remainder of the force. The separation of rebel forces provided Roman commanders with the opportunity to defeat them separately through concentrated attacks against divided opponents. Marcus Livius Crassus, who assumed command of Roman operations against the rebellion in 72 BC, recognized that the divided rebel army presented tactical opportunities that had been absent when Spartacus maintained unified command. Crassus possessed the military experience, financial resources, and political motivation necessary to organize an effective campaign against the rebels. Having served with distinction during Sulla's civil wars and accumulated substantial wealth through real estate speculation and slave trading, Crassus' approach to suppressing the rebellion combined traditional Roman military methods with innovative tactics designed specifically to counter the rebels' guerrilla warfare strategies. He assembled an army of 8 legions, approximately 40,000 men, including both veteran troops and newly recruited soldiers, whose training emphasized the discipline and coordination necessary for operations against irregular forces. The army's composition included substantial numbers of auxiliary troops from allied communities, providing specialized skills in archery, cavalry operations, and siege warfare that complemented the legion's heavy infantry capabilities. The Roman military response under Crassus emphasized systematic operations designed to eliminate the rebels' tactical advantages while forcing them into decisive battles where Roman numerical and organizational superiority could prove decisive. Crassus divided his forces into multiple columns that could operate independently while maintaining mutual support, allowing simultaneous pressure against different rebel groups while preventing Spartacus from concentrating his forces for major engagements. This approach required sophisticated logistics and communication systems that demonstrated the Roman military's organizational capabilities and professional competence. The defeat of Crixus' forces by Crassus' Lieutenant Arras near Mount Garganius eliminated approximately 1/3 of the rebel army and provided the Romans with their first major victory of the campaign. Crixus' death in this battle deprived the rebellion of one of its most capable military leaders, while demonstrating that Roman forces could defeat rebel armies when they abandoned guerrilla tactics for conventional warfare. The victory provided substantial propaganda benefits for Roman authorities while reducing the military threat posed by the rebellion. Spartacus's response to Crixus' defeat demonstrated both his tactical flexibility and his understanding of the psychological dimensions of military leadership. Rather than retreating immediately, he organized a memorial ceremony for the fallen GIC leader that included gladiatorial games featuring captured Roman prisoners. This event served multiple purposes, honoring Crixus according to traditional funeral customs, providing entertainment and emotional release for the rebel army, and demonstrating contempt for Roman authority through the symbolic reversal of gladiatorial roles. The rebels' continued northward movement through central Italy during 72 BC created panic in Rome as Spartacus's army approached the capital region. The proximity of a hostile force capable of defeating Roman armies generated fears of direct assault on the city itself. though Spartacus showed no interest in attempting such an operation. Instead, the rebel army continued toward the Alps, apparently maintaining the strategic objective of escaping Italian territory entirely. However, the reasons for the army's eventual turn back towards southern Italy remain unclear, with various explanations including disagreements among rebel leaders, difficulties in crossing the Alpine passes, or changes in strategic assessment. The rebels' return to southern Italy provided Cassius with the opportunity to implement comprehensive strategy for ending the rebellion through systematic military pressure combined with economic warfare. Crassus ordered the construction of fortifications across the narrow neck of the Bruttium Peninsula, creating a barrier that trapped Spartacus's army in the southern tip of Italy. This engineering project, spanning approximately 35 miles from coast to coast, included ditches, earthworks, and palisades that required substantial labor and resources, but effectively limited the rebels' mobility and strategic options. The siege tactics employed by Cassius represented innovative applications of traditional Roman military engineering to irregular warfare situations. The fortifications included watchtowers, patrol routes, and supply depots that allowed Roman forces to maintain continuous pressure on the trapped rebels while minimizing their own casualties. The barrier's construction demonstrated Roman organizational capabilities and their willingness to invest substantial resources in suppressing the rebellion, definitively, rather than seeking quick but potentially incomplete solutions. Spartacus' attempts to break through the Roman fortifications resulted in several fierce battles that demonstrated both the rebels' desperate courage and the effectiveness of Roman defensive preparations. The rebels constructed rafts and boats in attempts to cross to Sicily, where they hoped to incite slave revolts that would provide additional recruits and strategic options. However, these naval operations failed due to Roman naval patrols and the rebels' limited maritime capabilities, leaving them trapped within the peninsula with diminishing supplies and declining morale. The final campaign of the Third Servile War occurred during the spring of 71 BC, when Spartacus led his remaining forces in a desperate attempt to break through Roman lines and escape northward. The rebels' last major battle took place in Lucania, where Spartacus personally led cavalry charges against Roman positions in efforts to create gaps through which his infantry could advance. Contemporary accounts describe Spartacus fighting with exceptional courage and skill, killing 2 Roman centurions in personal combat before being overwhelmed by superior numbers and killed along with most of his army. The aftermath of the rebellion's suppression revealed the extent of Roman determination to prevent future slave uprisings through exemplary punishment and intimidation. Crassus ordered the crucifixion of 6,000 captured rebels along the Ion Way between Capua and Rome, creating a 120-meter corridor of death that served as a permanent reminder of the consequences of challenging Roman authority. The crucifixions continued for several days, with victims displayed at regular intervals to ensure maximum visibility for travelers using the major highway. This mass execution represented one of the largest organized killings in ancient history and demonstrated the Republic's willingness to employ extreme measures to maintain social control. The political consequences of the Third Civil War extended far beyond its immediate military resolution, contributing to the broader crisis of the Roman Republic and the rise of powerful military commanders who used their victories to advance personal political ambitions. Crassus' success in suppressing the rebellion enhanced his reputation and provided the military credentials necessary for his later political career, including his membership in the First Triumvirate alongside Pompey and Julius Caesar. However, the rebellion's scale and duration had revealed fundamental weaknesses in Roman social and economic systems that would continue generating instability throughout the Republic's final century. The crushing defeat of Spartacus and his followers along the Ion Way marked the end of gladiatorial rebellion. But it also ushered in an era where emperors would harness the arena's power for their own political survival and imperial legitimacy. Augustus, the first Roman emperor, understood that controlling gladiatorial games meant controlling the hearts and minds of the Roman populace. His systematic regulation of these spectacles transformed them from aristocratic funeral rites and political tools into instruments of imperial propaganda that would define the relationship between ruler and ruled for the next 2 centuries. Augustus's approach to gladiatorial regulation began with the Lex Julia Dev Publica in 18 BC, which established imperial oversight over all public entertainment in Rome and throughout the provinces. This legislation required official approval for any gladiatorial games exceeding a certain scale, effectively ending the era when ambitious politicians could sponsor massive spectacles to advance their careers. The law designated specific magistrates responsible for overseeing game organization, standardizing safety protocols, and ensuring that spectacles served imperial rather than personal political objectives. Augustus personally reviewed applications for major games, using his approval or denial as rewards and punishments for provincial governors and local elites. The emperor's personal involvement in gladiatorial affairs extended beyond mere administrative oversight to include detailed regulations governing fighter treatment, combat procedures, and audience management. Augustus established minimum standards for gladiatorial equipment, requiring that weapons meet specific quality benchmarks and that protective gear provide adequate safety without compromising entertainment value. He mandated regular medical examinations for fighters, created standardized training protocols for different gladiatorial types, and instituted appeals processes that allowed skilled gladiators to petition for freedom based on their service records and combat achievements. The economic framework governing gladiatorial games under Augustus reflected the emperor's broader efforts to stabilize Roman society through systematic regulation and imperial patronage. The state assumed direct control over major gladiatorial schools, purchasing existing ludi from private owners and establishing new training facilities under imperial management. These imperial schools, known as ludi imperiales, operated according to standardized procedures that emphasized professional training, adequate medical care, and systematic fighter development, rather than the profit-maximizing approaches that had characterized private enterprises. The Ludus Magnus, constructed adjacent to the Flavian amphitheater during the reign of Domitian, exemplified the imperial approach to gladiatorial training and management. This massive facility housed approximately 3,000 gladiators in individual cells, arranged around a central training arena that measured 200 feet by 130 feet. The complex included specialized training areas for different gladiatorial types, medical facilities staffed by skilled physicians, workshops for equipment maintenance and production, and administrative offices that managed the complex logistics of supplying fighters for games throughout the empire. The underground tunnel connecting the Ludus Magnus to the Colosseum represented a masterpiece of practical engineering that allowed gladiators to move directly from their training facility to the arena without exposure to crowds or potential escape opportunities. This tunnel, measuring approximately 20 feet in width and extending nearly 200 years, featured multiple security checkpoints, guard stations, and holding areas where fighters could prepare for combat while remaining under constant supervision. The tunnel's design included ventilation systems that provided adequate air circulation and drainage channels that prevented flooding during Rome's winter rains. The daily routine within imperial gladiatorial schools reflected the systematic approach that characterized Augustine administration across all aspects of government. Gladiators rose before dawn for morning exercises that included running calisthenics and weapons practice with wooden training equipment. The morning session emphasized physical conditioning and basic skill development, preparing fighters for the more intensive combat training that occupied the afternoon hours. Meals were carefully planned to provide adequate nutrition for intensive training while maintaining optimal fighting weight for different gladiatorial specializations. The afternoon training sessions within imperial schools focused on combat techniques specific to each gladiatorial type, with experienced instructors providing individual guidance and systematic skill development. Retiari practiced netcasting and trident work against moving targets and mock opponents, while Sius developed the aggressive pursuit tactics necessary for countering net fighters. Heavy gladiators like Mermeionas and Thraces worked on shield techniques, sword combinations, and the endurance training required for extended combat in heavy armor. The training included psychological preparation, designed to help fighters manage the stress of arena combat, while maintaining the aggressive mindset necessary for survival. The medical care provided to imperial gladiators surpassed that available to most Roman citizens, reflecting the substantial investment represented by trained fighters and the emperor's interest in maintaining high-quality spectacles. Each major gladiatorial school employed teams of physicians who specialized in treating combat injuries, managing training-related ailments, and maintaining fighter health through preventive care. These doctors developed innovative surgical techniques for treating sword wounds, pioneered rehabilitation methods for injured fighters, and created dietary programs that optimize performance while preventing common health problems associated with intensive physical training. The gladiatorial physician's expertise extended beyond simple injury treatment to include sophisticated understanding of human anatomy, pain management, and performance optimization that often exceeded the knowledge available to military medics or civilian doctors. They performed complex surgeries to repair damaged tendons and muscles, developed techniques for treating internal injuries that would otherwise prove fatal, and created prosthetic devices that allowed fighters to continue their careers despite permanent disabilities. The medical facilities within major gladiatorial schools included surgical suites, recovery wards, and pharmaceutical preparation areas that rivaled the best hospitals available to wealthy Roman citizens. The Flavian dynasty's approach to gladiatorial spectacle represented the culmination of imperial control over arena entertainment, combining massive public investment with unprecedented theatrical sophistication. Vespasian's decision to construct the Flavian amphitheater on the site of Nero's private lake carried profound symbolic significance, transforming a despised emperor's personal pleasure ground into a venue where ordinary citizens could witness spectacular entertainment funded by imperial generosity. The project's scale required mobilizing resources from across the empire, including specialized craftsmen, exotic materials, and innovative engineering techniques that pushed Roman construction capabilities to their limits. Titus's inaugural games for the completed Colosseum in 80 AD established new standards for imperial spectacle that would influence gladiatorial presentations for centuries. The 100-day celebration featured approximately 3,000 gladiatorial contests involving fighters drawn from schools throughout the empire, creating a tournament atmosphere that showcased the diversity and skill of imperial gladiatorial training programs. The games included representatives of every major gladiatorial type, exotic fighters from recently conquered territories, and special exhibitions featuring unusual weapon combinations and combat scenarios designed specifically for the inaugural celebration. The logistical challenges of organizing Titus's Centennial Games required unprecedented coordination between imperial administrators, gladiatorial schools, and support services throughout the Roman world. Transportation arrangements brought fighters from Britain, Germany, Africa, and Asia to Rome, along with their specialized equipment, training staff, and medical personnel. The games required approximately 500,000 pounds of sand to cover the arena floor throughout the celebration, along with massive quantities of food for both participants and spectators. Medical supplies for treating inevitable injuries and security arrangements for managing crowds that often exceeded the amphitheater's normal capacity. The animal hunts that accompanied Titus's gladiatorial games demonstrated the empire's reach and the emperor's ability to command exotic resources from the furthest corners of Roman territory. The celebrations featured lions from Africa, tigers from Asia, bears from Germany, and elephants from both Africa and India, along with more unusual animals like rhinoceros, hippopotamus, and various species of antelope and deer. The procurement of these animals required extensive networks of hunters, trappers, and animal traders who specialized in capturing and transporting dangerous wildlife across vast distances while maintaining their health and aggressive instincts. The staging of animal hunts within the Colosseum involved complex theatrical presentations that transformed simple killing into elaborate entertainment spectacles. The arena floor could be configured with artificial forests, rocky landscapes, and water features that created realistic hunting environments while providing dramatic backdrops for the action. Skilled hunters, known as venters, engage the animals using specialized techniques and equipment designed to create exciting contests while ensuring adequate safety for the performers. The most spectacular hunts featured multiple animals released simultaneously, creating chaotic battle scenes that tested the hunter's skills while providing maximum entertainment value for spectators. Trajan's Dean triumph celebrations in 107 AD surpassed even Titus' inaugural games in scale and extravagance, featuring approximately 10,000 gladiators in contests that extended over 123 days of continuous entertainment. The emperor's recent conquest of Disha had provided enormous wealth in the form of gold mines and territorial tribute, along with thousands of prisoners who could be trained as gladiators or used in mass executions that demonstrated Roman military superiority. The game celebrated not only military victory, but also the expansion of Roman civilization into new territories, where imperial values and institutions would replace local traditions and customs. The scale of Trajan's gladiatorial celebrations required establishing temporary training facilities and housing arrangements throughout Rome and its surrounding territories to accommodate the massive number of participants. Existing gladiatorial schools could not house 10,000 fighters simultaneously, forcing imperial administrators to commandeer military barracks, construct temporary housing complexes, and establish satellite training facilities where fighters could maintain their skills while awaiting their scheduled appearances. The logistical complexity of feeding, housing, and managing such numbers tested Roman administrative capabilities and required innovations in crowd control, security, and resource management. The variety of gladiatorial contests presented during Trajan's games reflected the emperor's desire to showcase the diversity of the Roman Empire and the effectiveness of imperial training programs in creating skilled fighters from diverse ethnic backgrounds. The celebrations featured traditional matchups between standard gladiatorial types alongside exotic presentations involving fighters trained in regional combat styles from newly conquered territories. Dayan warriors fought with their traditional curved swords and distinctive armor, while German tribesmen demonstrated their prowess with long swords and wooden shields. These ethnic presentations served both as entertainment and as demonstrations of Roman military superiority over conquered peoples. The role of gladiatorial combat in imperial propaganda extended beyond simple entertainment to encompass sophisticated messaging about Roman values, imperial benevolence, and the emperor's personal relationship with his subjects. Successful gladiatorial games demonstrated the emperor's generosity in providing expensive entertainment. His concern for public welfare through the employment of thousands of workers in game-related industries, and his commitment to traditional Roman values, embodied in the courage and skill displayed by arena fighters. The games created shared experiences that united diverse populations under imperial rule, while providing outlets for social tensions that might otherwise threaten political stability. The emperor's personal attendance at gladiatorial games carried enormous symbolic weight, demonstrating his accessibility to ordinary citizens and his participation in traditional Roman cultural activities. The imperial box within major amphitheaters was designed to maximize the emperor's visibility while ensuring adequate security, creating a theatrical setting where the ruler could display appropriate responses to arena action while maintaining the dignity required by his position. The emperor's gestures during gladiatorial contests, his decisions about life and death for defeated fighters, his reactions to particularly skillful performances, and his interactions with the crowd were carefully observed and interpreted as indicators of his character and fitness for rule. The development of imperial gladiatorial ceremonies included standardized rituals that reinforced the emperor's authority while creating predictable frameworks for public interaction between ruler and subjects. These ceremonies began with formal processions that displayed the emperor's retinue, military guards, and symbols of imperial power, followed by religious observances that connected the games to traditional Roman religious practices. The gladiatorial contests themselves were presented according to established protocols that emphasized order, dignity, and respect for traditional values, while providing adequate excitement and entertainment for diverse audiences. The imperial enthusiasm for personal participation in gladiatorial activities began with Caligula, whose fascination with arena combat reflected both genuine interest in the sport and calculated efforts to enhance his popular appeal through association with beloved entertainment. Caligula frequently attended training sessions at gladiatorial schools, where he observed combat techniques and occasionally participated in practice sessions using blunted weapons and protective equipment. These visits were carefully choreographed to demonstrate the emperor's physical courage and martial skills, while avoiding the genuine risks associated with actual combat. Caligula's involvement in gladiatorial activities extended to direct participation in arena exhibitions, where he fought against carefully selected opponents under controlled conditions that ensured his safety while creating the appearance of genuine combat. These performances featured the emperor equipped with high-quality weapons and armor, facing opponents who were instructed to provide entertaining resistance without seriously threatening imperial safety. The contests were presented as demonstrations of the emperor's martial prowess and personal courage. Though informed observers understood the artificial nature of these exhibitions, the political implications of Caligula's gladiatorial activities generated controversy among Roman elites, who viewed such behavior as beneath imperial dignity and potentially damaging to the emperor's authority. Traditional Roman values emphasized the distinction between rulers and entertainers, and the emperor's participation in arena activities blurred these boundaries in ways that some considered inappropriate for the holder of supreme political power. However, Caligula's gladiatorial performances proved popular with ordinary citizens who appreciated the emperor's willingness to participate personally in their favorite entertainment. Nero's relationship with gladiatorial combat reflected his broader interest in theatrical performance and public spectacle, though his approach differed significantly from Caligula's more direct participation in arena fighting. Nero preferred to sponsor elaborate gladiatorial presentations that showcased his artistic vision and creative abilities, often incorporating theatrical elements, musical performances, and dramatic narratives that transformed traditional combat into complex entertainment spectacles. These innovations appealed to audiences who appreciated novelty and sophistication, while maintaining the fundamental elements of gladiatorial combat that defined the genre. Nero's gladiatorial innovations included the introduction of female fighters, known as gladiatrices, who performed in specially designed contests that combined traditional combat techniques with theatrical presentations emphasizing grace, skill, and feminine beauty. These female gladiators were typically drawn from upper-class women who voluntarily entered the arena for the excitement and social attention it provided, rather than from slaves or condemned criminals who formed the majority of male fighters. The gladiatrices received specialized training that adapted traditional gladiatorial techniques for female physiology, while maintaining the entertainment value and competitive intensity the audiences expected. The training of female gladiators required modifications to standard gladiatorial instruction that accommodated differences in strength, reach, and fighting style, while maintaining competitive balance and entertainment value. Female fighters typically specialized in lighter weapon combinations that emphasized speed and agility over raw power, though some gladiatores mastered the same equipment used by their male counterparts. The most successful female gladiators developed distinctive fighting styles that played to their strengths while creating visually appealing performances that satisfied audience expectations for both combat skill and aesthetic presentation. Commodus represented the ultimate expression of imperial gladiatorial enthusiasm, personally participating in hundreds of arena contests throughout his reign, while transforming the emperor's relationship with gladiatorial combat from occasional patronage to obsessive personal involvement. Unlike his predecessors who treated arena participation as a political theater, Commodus genuinely considered himself a professional gladiator and demanded recognition for his fighting skills and arena achievements. His participation in gladiatorial combat reflected both personal psychological needs and calculated political strategy designed to enhance his popularity with the masses who formed his primary base of political support. The emperor's gladiatorial career began with private training sessions within the imperial palace, where he learned combat techniques from professional instructors while developing the physical conditioning required for arena fighting. Commodus employed some of the empire's most skilled gladiatorial trainers, who provided individual instruction in various fighting styles, while adapting their teaching methods to accommodate the unique requirements of training an emperor. These sessions were conducted in complete secrecy to prevent political opponents from learning about the emperor's unconventional interests and using them for propaganda purposes. Commodus' public gladiatorial performances were carefully staged to ensure his safety while creating the appearance of genuine combat that would satisfy audience expectations and enhance his reputation as a skilled fighter. The emperor typically fought against opponents who were instructed to provide entertaining resistance, while avoiding any actions that might seriously injure or kill him. These contests featured high-quality weapons and armor that provided adequate protection while maintaining the visual appeal and apparent danger that made gladiatorial combat exciting for spectators. The political consequences of Commodus' gladiatorial activities proved ultimately destructive to his reign and contributed to the broader crisis that would eventually end the Antonine dynasty. His obsession with arena combat distracted him from the administrative responsibilities of imperial rule, while alienating senatorial and equestrian classes, who viewed his behavior as undignified and inappropriate for an emperor. The substantial resources devoted to gladiatorial activities, including the construction of private training facilities and the employment of hundreds of specialized personnel, diverted funds from more pressing imperial needs, while generating resentment among taxpayers who bore the costs of the emperor's expensive hobby. The transformation of gladiatorial combat from desperate prison breaks to systematic imperial entertainment required the development of sophisticated training institutions that could produce skilled fighters on an industrial scale. The great gladiatorial schools of Rome and the provinces operated as complex military-industrial enterprises, combining elements of prison, military academy, and professional sports facility to create fighters capable of satisfying increasingly demanding audiences. These institutions represented some of the most advanced training facilities in the ancient world, employing cutting-edge techniques in physical conditioning, medical care, and psychological preparation that often surpassed those available to Roman legionaries. The Ludus Magnus, Rome's premier gladiatorial training facility, established the standard for imperial gladiatorial education through its systematic approach to fighter development and institutional organization. The school's daily routine began before dawn with the sounding of bronze horns that summoned approximately 3,000 residents from their individual cells to the central courtyard for morning roll call. Each gladiator was assigned a number corresponding to a cell location and training group, creating an administrative system that allowed instructors to track individual progress while maintaining discipline among the large population of potentially dangerous fighters. The morning exercises at the Ludus Magnus emphasized fundamental physical conditioning that built the strength, endurance, and agility required for arena combat. Gladiators began with running exercises around the school's perimeter track, a circuit measuring nearly half a mile that included obstacles, elevation changes, and varied terrain designed to simulate arena conditions. The running was followed by calisthenics, including push-ups, sit-ups, and jumping exercises that developed functional strength while improving cardiovascular fitness. These basic exercises were supplemented by specialized conditioning work using weighted training equipment, resistance exercises with leather straps and pulley, and flexibility training that maintained joint mobility despite the physical demands of combat preparation. The training weapons employed at imperial gladiatorial schools were crafted specifically for instruction purposes, featuring increased weight and modified designs that built strength while teaching proper technique. The wooden gladius used by novice fighters weighed nearly twice as much as combat weapons, forcing trainees to develop the arm and shoulder strength necessary for extended sword work while learning correct grip, stance, and striking patterns. Training shields were similarly oversized and weighted, requiring fighters to build the core strength and endurance needed to maintain defensive positions throughout lengthy contests. The palace training system formed the foundation of gladiatorial combat instruction, utilizing wooden posts of varying heights and configurations to teach fundamental attack and defense techniques. Each gladiatorial type trained against specifically designed posts that replicated the dimensions and characteristics of their typical opponents. Retiar practiced netcasting and trident work against posts equipped with projecting arms that simulated human limbs, while secutors developed their aggressive charging techniques against posts positioned to represent net fighters in various defensive positions. The posts were constructed from dense hardwoods that could withstand repeated strikes while providing realistic feedback about proper weapon impact and edge alignment. The progression from basic palace work to advanced combat training followed carefully structured curricula that gradually increased complexity and intensity as fighters demonstrated competence at each level. Novice gladiators spend their first months mastering fundamental movements, footwork patterns, and weapon handling skills before advancing to partner exercises with other trainees. These early partner drills used heavily padded weapons and protective equipment to prevent serious injuries, while allowing fighters to experience the timing, distance, and psychological pressure of combat against human opponents. The specialized training areas within major gladiatorial schools reflected the diverse requirements of different fighter types and the sophisticated understanding of combat techniques that had evolved through centuries of arena experience. The Ludus Magnus included separate training courts for net fighters, where retiari could practice their mobility-based tactics in spaces that replicated arena dimensions and surface conditions. These areas featured sand floors identical to those used in actual amphitheaters, along with obstacles and barriers that allowed fighters to develop the spatial awareness and tactical flexibility required for successful arena performance. Heavy gladiator training took place in reinforced areas where the impact of shield work and aggressive combat techniques would not damage the facility structure or endanger other trainees. These spaces included specialized equipment for practicing shield charges, defensive formations, and the close quarters grappling techniques that often determine the outcome of heavily armored contests. The training areas were equipped with padded walls and floors that allowed fighters to practice high-impact techniques while minimizing injury risks that could interrupt their preparation schedules. The Ludista Seekers specialized in training fighters from the recently conquered Dene territories, adapting their traditional combat techniques for arena presentation while maintaining the distinctive characteristics that made these fighters popular with Roman audiences. The school's training program incorporated Dene weapons, including the curved foul sword and distinctive shield designs, requiring instructors to develop new teaching methods that preserved authentic fighting techniques while ensuring adequate safety for both trainees and opponents. The Dene fighters' natural aggression and familiarity with their traditional equipment often allowed them to complete training programs more quickly than fighters learning completely foreign combat styles. The daily schedule at Dian focused training facilities reflected the cultural backgrounds of the fighters, while maintaining the discipline and structure required for effective gladiatorial preparation. Morning training sessions began with traditional Dene warrior rituals that helped maintain cultural identity and group cohesion among fighters who had been forcibly separated from their homeland. These ceremonies included chanted prayers to Dene war gods, group exercises that reinforced tribal solidarity, and the maintenance of traditional hairstyles and body decorations that distinguished Dene fighters from other gladiatorial types. The Ludus Matutinus earned its reputation as the empire's premier facility for training ventors and specialized beast fighters through its comprehensive programs in animal handling, hunting techniques, and the unique combat skills required for facing wild animals in arena settings. The school maintained extensive menageries that housed the full range of animals commonly used in arena hunts, allowing trainees to gain experience with different species while developing the specialized knowledge required for safe and entertaining animal combat. The Beast Fighter training program at the Ludus Matutinus began with extensive education about animal behavior, anatomy, and the specific techniques required for engaging different species safely and effectively. Trainees learned to recognize the warning signs that preceded animal attacks, the optimal striking points for quickly dispatching various creatures, and the movement patterns that could prevent or minimize animal charges. This theoretical knowledge was supplemented by practical exercises using tethered animals, mechanical devices that simulated animal movements, and carefully controlled encounters with less dangerous species that allowed fighters to gain confidence and experience before facing more formidable opponents. The social hierarchy within gladiatorial schools reflected both the military origins of their organizational structure and the complex relationships between different categories of personnel required for effective operation. At the apex of each school's hierarchy stood the lanista, typically a wealthy freedman or businessman who owned the facility and bore ultimate responsibility for its financial success and operational effectiveness. The lanista made crucial decisions about fighter acquisition, training priorities, equipment purchases, and the rental agreements that provided the school's primary revenue through supplying gladiators for games throughout the empire. The magistrates served as the senior administrative officials within each school, handling the complex logistics of housing, feeding, and training hundreds of fighters while maintaining the detailed records required for effective management. These officials typically possessed extensive experience in gladiatorial affairs, often having served as successful fighters themselves before transitioning to administrative roles. The magistry coordinated training schedules, managed equipment inventories, supervised medical care, and handled the negotiations with game sponsors who sought to rent fighters for specific events. The doctors represented the elite tier of gladiatorial instructors, master fighters who had earned their freedom through exceptional arena performance and demonstrated the teaching ability necessary to pass their skills to new generations of gladiators. Each doctor specialized in specific gladiatorial types or combat techniques, developing expertise that made them invaluable for training fighters in their particular areas of knowledge. The most accomplished doctors commanded substantial salaries and enjoyed considerable autonomy in developing training programs and selecting promising students for advanced instruction. The relationship between doctors and their students involved complex dynamics that combined military discipline with the personal mentorship necessary for developing elite combat skills. Successful doctors learned to balance harsh training methods that built physical and mental toughness with the encouragement and technical guidance that allowed fighters to reach their full potential. The best instructors developed reputations that attracted ambitious trainees and influenced the overall quality of fighters produced by their schools, creating competitive advantages that translated directly into financial success and professional recognition. Veteran gladiators who had survived multiple arena contests but had not yet earned their freedom occupied an intermediate position within the school hierarchy, serving as assistant instructors, equipment specialists, and mentors for newer fighters. These experienced gladiators possessed practical knowledge of arena combat that could not be taught through theoretical instruction, including the psychological techniques for managing pre-combat stress, the tactical adaptations required for different opponents and venue conditions, and the performance skills that could influence crowd reactions and referee decisions. The Tinium, or novice gladiators, formed the largest population within most schools and represented the greatest investment of training resources and instructional attention. These new fighters came from diverse backgrounds, including military prisoners, condemned criminals, purchased slaves, and voluntary recruits who had signed contracts surrendering their legal rights in exchange for the opportunity to earn money and potentially achieve fame through arena success. The integration of such diverse populations required sophisticated management techniques that could forge effective fighting units from individuals with vastly different cultural backgrounds, physical capabilities, and motivational factors. The initial assessment process for new gladiators involved comprehensive evaluations of physical condition, combat experience, psychological stability, and the specific attributes that would determine their optimal gladiatorial specialization. Experienced doctors observed potential fighters through a series of tests that measured strength, speed, agility, courage, and the ability to learn complex motor skills under pressure. These assessments determine not only which gladiatorial type each fighter would train for, but also the intensity and duration of training required to bring them to acceptable performance standards. The medical care provided within gladiatorial schools represented one of the most advanced healthcare systems available in the ancient world, reflecting both the substantial economic investment represented by trained fighters and the practical necessity of maintaining their health and combat effectiveness. Each major school employed teams of specialized physicians, known as medi, who had developed expertise in treating the specific types of injuries and health problems associated with intensive combat training and arena fighting. The gladiatorial physician's medical knowledge encompassed sophisticated understanding of human anatomy, derived from their extensive experience treating combat wounds and observing the effects of various weapons on the human body. These doctors could perform complex surgical procedures, including the repair of severed tendons, the treatment of internal injuries caused by blunt force trauma, and the management of infected wounds that would often prove fatal without proper care. Their surgical instruments included specialized tools designed specifically for treating gladiatorial injuries, such as curved needles for suturing wounds in difficult locations and extraction devices for removing embedded weapon fragments. The nutritional programs developed for gladiatorial training reflected advanced understanding of the dietary requirements for maintaining peak physical condition while supporting the rapid healing of training injuries. The gladiatorial diet emphasized high-protein foods including meat, fish, eggs, and dairy products that provided the building blocks for muscle development and repair. These protein sources were supplemented with grains, vegetables, and fruits that supplied the carbohydrates and micronutrients necessary for sustained energy and optimal health. The specific dietary requirements varied according to each fighter's gladiatorial specialization and training phase, with heavier fighters receiving larger portions to support their greater muscle mass, while lighter fighters followed more restricted diets that maintained optimal speed and agility. Fighters recovering from injuries received specialized nutrition that included additional protein and specific foods believed to promote healing, such as bone broth, organ meats, and various herbal preparations that had demonstrated effectiveness in treating common gladiatorial ailments. The psychological preparation of gladiators involves sophisticated techniques for managing the mental stresses associated with facing potential death in public spectacles, while maintaining the aggressive mindset necessary for effective combat performance. The most successful training programs recognize that psychological conditioning was as important as physical preparation, developing methods that help fighters cope with pre-combat anxiety while building the mental toughness required for arena survival. The religious and spiritual aspects of gladiatorial training provided important psychological support for fighters facing the constant possibility of death in their professional activities. Most gladiatorial schools maintained shrines to various gods associated with war, courage, and protection, where fighters could offer prayers and sacrifices before important contests. These religious observances served multiple functions, providing emotional comfort for fighters while reinforcing group identity and shared purpose among the diverse populations within each school. The relationship between gladiators and their trainers involved complex emotional dynamics that combined elements of military discipline, paternal guidance, and professional mentorship. Successful doctors learned to inspire loyalty and dedication from their students, while maintaining the emotional distance necessary for sending them into potentially fatal contests. The most effective training relationships produced fighters who viewed their instructors as father figures and role models, creating psychological bonds that motivated exceptional effort and performance, while providing the emotional support necessary for coping with the unique stresses of gladiatorial life. The psychological conditioning that prepared gladiators for arena combat proved equally valuable in establishing gladiatorial culture throughout the Roman provinces, where local populations encountered these spectacular entertainments as symbols of Roman civilization and imperial power. The systematic expansion of gladiatorial games beyond Italy began during the late Republic, when successful generals and provincial governors recognized the political advantages of sponsoring familiar Roman entertainments in newly conquered territories. These early provincial games served multiple functions simultaneously, demonstrating Roman cultural superiority, providing entertainment that could pacify potentially rebellious populations, and offering local elites opportunities to display their loyalty to Roman values through sponsorship of traditional spectacles. The spread of gladiatorial games into Gaul commenced shortly after Caesar's conquest, when Roman administrators established permanent settlements and began the process of cultural integration that would transform Celtic society over the following centuries. The initial GIC response to gladiatorial combat reflected the complex relationship between indigenous warrior traditions and Roman entertainment culture. Celtic societies had their own forms of ritualized combat, including single combats between champions and ceremonial fights associated with religious festivals. But these traditions differed significantly from the systematic professional approach that characterized Roman gladiatorial games. The construction of the amphitheater at Lugdunum around 19 BC marked a crucial milestone in the Romanization of Gaul, providing a permanent venue for gladiatorial games that could accommodate audiences drawn from throughout the province. This structure, measuring approximately 450 feet by 350 feet, featured the standard Roman design elements, including tiered seating, underground chambers for housing fighters and animals, and the mechanical systems necessary for staging complex spectacles. The amphitheater's location at the confluence of the Rhone and Sion rivers made it accessible to populations throughout central Gaul, while establishing Lugdunum as the region's primary center for Roman entertainment. The gladiatorial games at Lugdunum incorporated distinctively Gaelic elements that reflected local cultural preferences while maintaining the fundamental characteristics that defined Roman arena entertainment. Celtic warriors who had been captured during the conquest wars fought using traditional GIC weapons, including long swords, oval shields, and distinctive helmets with elaborate decorations. These fighters, known as GI and Roman sources, developed fighting techniques that combined their indigenous combat training with the systematic instruction provided by Roman gladiatorial schools, creating a hybrid style that proved popular with both Roman and GIC audiences. The recruitment of GIC gladiators followed patterns established throughout the empire, drawing fighters from military prisoners, condemned criminals, and volunteers who sought the financial rewards and potential social advancement that successful arena careers could provide. However, the specific circumstances of GIC society created unique recruitment opportunities, as the Roman conquest had displaced numerous warriors from their traditional roles, while creating economic conditions that made gladiatorial careers attractive to ambitious young men from tribal backgrounds. The training of GIC gladiators required adaptations to standard Roman instructional methods that accommodated the fighter's existing combat skills, while introducing them to the specialized techniques required for arena performance. Many GIC recruits possessed extensive military experience from the conquest wars, including familiarity with Roman tactical methods and weapon systems that accelerated their gladiatorial training. However, their adaptation to the entertainment aspects of arena combat often proved more challenging, as Celtic warrior culture emphasized practical combat effectiveness over the theatrical elements that Roman audiences expected from gladiatorial performances. The economic impact of gladiatorial games on G society extended far beyond the immediate cost of staging spectacles, creating entire industries that supported the complex logistics required for regular arena entertainment. Local craftsmen developed expertise in producing gladiatorial equipment, including weapons, armor, and the specialized gear required for different fighter types. These manufacturing operations employed hundreds of skilled workers while creating supply networks that extended throughout the province and beyond. As GIC produced equipment gained recognition for its quality and distinctive design characteristics, the amphitheater at Nemulsus exemplified the adaptation of Roman architectural principles to provincial conditions and resources, while maintaining the functional requirements necessary for effective gladiatorial presentations. Constructed during the late 1st century AD, this building utilized local limestone quarried from nearby deposits, demonstrating how provincial communities could create impressive Roman-style structures using readily available materials. The amphitheater's capacity of approximately 24,000 spectators made it one of the largest in Gaul, reflecting the prosperity of the surrounding region and the popularity of gladiatorial entertainment among Romanized Gaelic populations. The design innovations incorporated into the Neosis amphitheatre included modifications that addressed the specific climatic conditions of southern Gaul, while maintaining the architectural standards expected of Roman public buildings. The structure featured enhanced drainage systems designed to handle the region's occasional heavy rains, along with ventilation modifications that improved air circulation during the hot summer months, when major games typically occurred. These adaptations demonstrated the flexibility of Roman architectural principles and the ability of provincial builders to create effective solutions for local environmental challenges. The gladiatorial schools established in Gaul developed distinctive training programs that incorporated Celtic fighting traditions while preparing fighters for the standardized combat styles expected in Roman arenas throughout the empire. The school at Augustodunum specialized in training fighters who combined Greek weapons expertise with Roman tactical discipline, creating gladiators who could perform effectively in provincial venues while meeting the quality standards required for appearances in major metropolitan amphitheaters. The cultural integration of gladiatorial games into Greek society involved complex negotiations between Roman administrative requirements and indigenous social structures that had governed Celtic communities for centuries. Local tribal leaders found themselves balancing their traditional roles as military commanders and religious authorities with new responsibilities as sponsors of Roman-style entertainment that demonstrated their loyalty to imperial authority. This transition required developing new forms of social prestige and political influence that incorporated Roman cultural elements while maintaining connections to traditional Celtic values and practices. The expansion of gladiatorial culture into España followed similar patterns, but encountered different local conditions that shaped the specific characteristics of Spanish arena entertainment. The Iberian Peninsula's diverse geography and varied cultural traditions created regional variations and gladiatorial practices that reflected the complex ethnic and linguistic landscape that Roman administrators encountered during the conquest period. The mountainous terrain of northern Spain favored the development of hunting-based spectacles that utilized local wildlife and traditional hunting techniques, while the more urbanized southern regions adopted conventional gladiatorial formats that closely resembled those popular in Italy. The amphitheater at Ameritor Augusta represented one of the most sophisticated provincial arena complexes, featuring advanced engineering systems that rivaled those found in major Italian cities. The structure's underground chambers included elaborate animal handling facilities designed to accommodate the exotic African wildlife that formed a major attraction of Spanish games, along with sophisticated water management systems that allowed for naval battle presentations and elaborate scenic effects. The amphitheater's capacity of approximately 15,000 spectators served a regional population that included both Roman colonists and Romanized Spanish communities, creating a diverse audience with varied entertainment preferences and cultural expectations. The recruitment of Spanish gladiators drew heavily on the peninsula's military traditions, and the substantial population of prisoners captured during the lengthy conquest wars that had established Roman control over the region. Spanish fighters, known for their skill with traditional Iberian weapons, including the curved falca sword and distinctive shield designs, adapted readily to gladiatorial training while maintaining fighting techniques that distinguished them from other provincial gladiator types. The Spanish gladiatorial schools developed specialized programs that preserved these indigenous combat skills while teaching the performance elements required for successful arena careers. The economic development stimulated by gladiatorial games in Hispania created substantial opportunities for local entrepreneurs who established businesses supporting the complex logistics of arena entertainment. Spanish craftsmen became renowned throughout the empire for their skill in producing high-quality gladiatorial equipment, particularly weapons and armor that combined Roman functional requirements with distinctive Spanish decorative elements. These manufacturing operations generated substantial export revenues, while creating employment opportunities that contributed to the province's overall economic prosperity. The spread of gladiatorial culture into Britain presented unique challenges due to the island's geographic isolation, harsh climate, and the fierce resistance that characterized the Roman conquest of Celtic tribes. The establishment of amphitheaters in major British settlements occurred later than in other provinces and required significant modifications to standard Roman designs that could accommodate the specific environmental conditions of Northern Europe. The amphitheater at Camella Dunham served as the primary venue for gladiatorial games in early Roman Britain, providing a symbolic demonstration of Roman cultural dominance in the former capital of British resistance. The British gladiatorial experience incorporated elements of local Celtic warrior traditions that had developed independently from continental European practices, creating distinctive fighting styles that reflected the unique characteristics of insular Celtic culture. British fighters utilized traditional weapons, including long swords, spears, and the distinctive shields that had proven effective against Roman military forces during the conquest wars. The adaptation of these weapons and techniques for arena use required extensive modifications that preserved their visual appeal and cultural significance, while ensuring adequate safety for both fighters and audiences. The climatic challenges of staging gladiatorial games in Britain required innovative solutions that addressed the frequent rain, cold temperatures, and limited daylight that characterized much of the year in northern latitudes. British amphitheaters incorporated covered areas and heating systems that allowed spectacles to continue during adverse weather conditions, while scheduling practices concentrated major games during the brief summer months when outdoor entertainment remained feasible. These adaptations demonstrated the determination of Roman administrators to maintain cultural standards regardless of environmental obstacles. The recruitment of British gladiators reflected the complex social dynamics that emerged following the Roman conquest, as displaced Celtic warriors sought new roles within the imperial system while maintaining connections to their traditional cultural identities. Many British fighters came from tribal backgrounds that emphasized individual combat prowess and personal honor, values that translated effectively to gladiatorial careers, while providing psychological motivation for the intense training required for arena success. The expansion into North Africa presented different opportunities and challenges, as the region's proximity to Rome and its substantial urban populations created favorable conditions for gladiatorial development, while the harsh desert climate and exotic wildlife offered unique entertainment possibilities. The amphitheater at Leptus Magna in modern Libya exemplified the grandeur that characterized North African arena construction, featuring elaborate decorative programs and engineering systems that rivaled the finest Italian examples. The North African gladiatorial tradition became renowned throughout the empire for its spectacular animal hunts that featured the continent's distinctive wildlife, including lions, leopards, elephants, and various species of antelope and other game animals. The procurement and transportation of these animals created substantial economic opportunities for local hunters and animal traders, while establishing supply networks that extended throughout the Mediterranean world. The expertise developed by North African animal handlers and trainers became highly valued in amphitheaters throughout the empire, creating career opportunities that allowed skilled professionals to travel extensively while earning substantial incomes. The gladiatorial schools established in major North African cities developed specialized programs that emphasize beast fighting and hunting techniques, while maintaining comprehensive training in conventional gladiatorial combat. The school at Tistras became particularly renowned for producing skilled vendors who could engage dangerous animals safely and entertainingly, creating performances that satisfied audience demands for spectacular and exotic entertainment. The cultural integration of gladiatorial games into North African society involved complex interactions between Roman entertainment traditions, indigenous Berber customs, and the established urban cultures that are developed in major coastal cities. Local elites found in gladiatorial sponsorship opportunities to demonstrate their Roman cultural sophistication while maintaining connections to traditional African values and practices. This cultural synthesis created distinctive North African variations in gladiatorial presentation that incorporated local musical traditions, ceremonial elements, and aesthetic preferences while preserving the fundamental characteristics that defined Roman arena entertainment. The eastern provinces of the empire presented perhaps the greatest challenges for gladiatorial expansion, as these regions possessed sophisticated urban cultures and entertainment traditions that had developed independently over centuries. The Greek cities of Asia Minor and Syria had their own forms of athletic competition and public spectacle that competed with gladiatorial games for audience attention and elite sponsorship. The successful integration of gladiatorial culture into these Eastern contexts required careful adaptation that respected local preferences while introducing Roman entertainment standards. The amphitheater at Pergamene demonstrated how Roman arena architecture could be successfully integrated into existing Greek urban environments while maintaining the functional requirements necessary for gladiatorial presentations. The structure's design incorporated Greek architectural elements and decorative programs while providing the underground facilities and mechanical systems required for complex arena spectacles. This hybrid approach created a venue that satisfied both Roman administrative expectations and local aesthetic preferences. The recruitment and training of Eastern gladiators drew on the region's diverse military traditions and the substantial populations of prisoners captured during various conquest wars and civil conflicts. Greek, Syrian, and Anatolian fighters brought different combat techniques and cultural perspectives to gladiatorial training, creating a diverse pool of talent that enriched the overall quality and variety of arena entertainment throughout the empire. The gladiatorial schools in major Eastern cities developed programs that accommodated these diverse backgrounds, while maintaining the standardized training methods that ensured consistent performance quality. The economic impact of gladiatorial games in the eastern provinces created opportunities for local artisans and merchants, while stimulating trade networks that connected these regions more closely to the broader imperial economy. Eastern craftsmen became renowned for their skill in producing luxury gladiatorial equipment and decorative items that combined Roman functional requirements with the sophisticated artistic traditions of Greek and Near Eastern cultures. These products found markets throughout the empire, while contributing to the economic prosperity of the producing regions. The sophisticated gladiatorial networks that had connected the eastern provinces to Rome's entertainment empire began facing their most formidable challenge, not from barbarian invasions or economic collapse, but from a growing religious movement that fundamentally rejected the moral foundations of arena spectacle. The rise of Christianity during the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD created an unprecedented ideological opposition to gladiatorial combat that would ultimately prove more destructive to the institution than any military defeat or financial crisis. The Christian critique of gladiatorial games struck at the heart of Roman cultural identity, challenging not merely the entertainment value of arena spectacles, but the entire system of values that had sustained gladiatorial culture for over 4 centuries. The earliest Christian opposition to gladiatorial games emerged from theological principles that viewed human life as sacred and divinely created, making the deliberate killing of human beings for entertainment purposes fundamentally incompatible with Christian doctrine. The Apostolic Fathers, writing during the late 1st and early 2nd centuries AD, established the foundational Christian position that participation in or attendance at gladiatorial games constituted a form of murder by proxy, implicating spectators in the bloodshed they witnessed and enjoyed. This theological stance created immediate practical problems for Christian converts who lived in cities where gladiatorial games formed essential elements of social and political life. Tullian of Carthage, writing around 197 AD in his treatise De Spectacularis, provided the most comprehensive early Christian condemnation of gladiatorial entertainment, combining theological arguments with detailed observations of arena culture that demonstrated his intimate familiarity with the spectacles he opposed. Tertullian argued that gladiatorial games violated multiple Christian principles simultaneously. They celebrated violence and death, encouraged bloodlust and cruelty among spectators, honored pagan gods through their religious ceremonies, and created social hierarchies based on the ability to provide expensive entertainment rather than Christian virtues of humility and charity. Tertullian's analysis of gladiatorial spectatorship revealed sophisticated understanding of the psychological mechanisms that made arena entertainment compelling for Roman audiences. He observed that spectators experienced vicarious participation in the violence they witnessed, developing emotional investments in particular fighters and outcomes that transformed them from passive observers into active participants in the bloodshed. This psychological involvement, according to Tertullian, corrupted the souls of Christian spectators by encouraging them to take pleasure in human suffering and death, directly contradicting Christ's teachings about love, compassion, and the sanctity of human life. The practical implications of Christian opposition to gladiatorial games created significant challenges for early Christian communities, particularly those located in major urban centers, where arena entertainment formed integral parts of social and economic life. Christian merchants who refused to participate in the commercial activities surrounding gladiatorial games found themselves excluded from lucrative business opportunities, while Christian officials who declined to sponsor or attend games faced political marginalization and potential persecution. These economic and social pressures forced many Christians to choose between their religious convictions and their material prosperity, creating internal tensions within Christian communities about the appropriate response to gladiatorial culture. The persecution of Christians under various emperors during the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD ironically provided the most dramatic demonstrations of Christian opposition to gladiatorial values, as Christian martyrs in arena settings embodied principles that directly challenged the entertainment culture surrounding them. Unlike gladiators who fought for survival, glory, or financial reward, Christian martyrs entered arenas with the explicit intention of dying for their religious beliefs, transforming spaces designed for entertainment into venues for religious witness and spiritual triumph. The martyrdom of Saint Perpetual and her companions in the amphitheater at Carthage in 203 AD exemplified the Christian challenge to gladiatorial culture through their deliberate rejection of the entertainment values that arena spectacles represented. Perpetua, a young noble woman who had converted to Christianity, refused multiple opportunities to renounce her faith and avoid execution, instead using her trial and imprisonment to demonstrate Christian principles of courage, faith, and devotion to spiritual rather than worldly values. Her detailed prison diary, one of the earliest Christian texts written by a woman, provided insights into the psychological and spiritual preparation that distinguish Christian martyrs from gladiatorial fighters. The arena execution of Christian martyrs created complex dynamics that both reinforced and undermined gladiatorial culture. Simultaneously, Roman authorities intended these executions to demonstrate the consequences of rejecting imperial authority and traditional religious practices, using the familiar arena setting to maximize the educational impact of public punishment. However, the martyrs' behavior often subverted these intentions by providing examples of courage and dignity that impressed spectators while challenging the values that gladiatorial entertainment promoted. The Christian martyrs' refusal to fight back against their executioners or wild animals created stark contrasts with gladiatorial behavior that highlighted fundamental differences between Christian and Roman approaches to death and honor. While gladiators fought desperately for survival and demonstrated their worth through combat skill and courage in the face of death, Christian martyrs embraced death willingly while maintaining peaceful demeanor and forgiving attitudes toward their persecutors. These behavioral differences created powerful visual demonstrations of alternative value systems that resonated with some spectators, while confusing or disturbing others who expected arena participants to conform to established gladiatorial traditions. The conversion of Constantine and the subsequent legalization of Christianity through the Edict of Milan in 313 AD marked the beginning of the end for gladiatorial games. Though the process of elimination would extend over more than a century as established cultural practices proved resistant to immediate change, Constantine's personal attitude toward gladiatorial games reflected the complex negotiations between Christian principles and Roman political realities that characterized the early Christian empire. While the emperor publicly embraced Christian values and supported church leaders who condemned arena violence, he continued to sponsor gladiatorial games when political circumstances required such demonstrations of imperial generosity and traditional Roman values. Constantine's legislation regarding gladiatorial games revealed the gradual nature of Christian influence on imperial policy and the practical difficulties of eliminating deeply entrenched cultural institutions. His laws restricted certain aspects of gladiatorial combat while preserving others, creating compromises that satisfied neither Christian critics nor traditional Roman audiences. The emperor banned the branding of condemned criminals on their faces, arguing that human beings created in God's image should not be permanently disfigured. But he continued to allow their execution in arena settings under other circumstances. The economic factors contributing to gladiatorial decline during the 3rd and 4th centuries AD created practical pressures that reinforce Christian moral opposition, while making arena entertainment increasingly difficult to sustain. The costs associated with maintaining gladiatorial schools, procuring exotic animals, and staging elaborate spectacles had always represented substantial financial burdens for sponsors. But these expenses became prohibitive as imperial revenues declined due to military pressures, administrative inefficiencies, and economic disruption caused by civil wars and barbarian invasions. The inflation that characterized the later Roman Empire made gladiatorial games economically unsustainable for all but the wealthiest sponsors, effectively limiting arena entertainment to imperial-sponsored events and the most important religious festivals. Provincial cities that had maintained regular gladiatorial programs for centuries found themselves unable to afford the costs of importing fighters, purchasing animals, and maintaining amphitheater facilities, leading to the gradual abandonment of arena entertainment in many regions throughout the empire. The barbarian invasions that intensified during the 4th and 5th centuries AD disrupted the supply networks that had sustained gladiatorial culture, while creating military pressures that diverted resources from entertainment to defense. The procurement of exotic animals from Africa and Asia became increasingly difficult as trade routes fell under barbarian control. While the recruitment of skilled gladiators suffered as military demands absorbed potential fighters and trainers, these practical constraints made gladiatorial games less spectacular and entertaining, reducing their appeal for audiences while increasing their costs for sponsors. The transformation of Roman military organization during the later empire eliminated many of the sources that had traditionally supplied gladiatorial schools with trained fighters. The increasing reliance on barbarian federity and the decline of traditional Roman military training reduced the pool of experienced warriors available for gladiatorial recruitment. While changes in legal procedures limited the number of condemned criminals sentenced to arena combat. These developments forced gladiatorial schools to rely increasingly on volunteers and purchased slaves, both of which represented more expensive alternatives to the prisoners of war and condemned criminals who had traditionally formed the backbone of gladiatorial recruitment. Augustine of Hippo, writing during the late 4th and early 5th centuries AD, provided theological sophistication to Christian opposition to gladiatorial games that went beyond earlier moral condemnations to address the fundamental philosophical questions about human nature, social organization, and the proper relationship between temporal and spiritual authorities. Augustine's analysis of gladiatorial culture in his Confessions and City of God revealed deep understanding of the psychological and social functions that arena entertainment served in Roman society, while demonstrating why these functions were incompatible with Christian civilization. Augustine's personal experience with gladiatorial culture, gained during his youth in North Africa, where arena entertainment remained popular despite growing Christian influence, provided him with detailed knowledge of the spectacles he criticized and the social dynamics they created. His famous account of his friend Olympus's addiction to gladiatorial games illustrated the psychological mechanisms that made arena entertainment compelling, while demonstrating the spiritual dangers that Christian leaders associated with such spectacles. Augustine's description of Olympus being drawn back to gladiatorial attendance, despite his intellectual opposition, revealed the powerful emotional and social pressures that sustained arena culture, even among educated individuals who understood its moral problems. The theological framework that Augustine developed for understanding gladiatorial games emphasized their role in promoting and celebrating the fallen human nature that Christianity sought to redeem through divine grace. Augustine argued that the pleasure spectators derived from witnessing violence and death reflected the corruption of human nature caused by original sin, making gladiatorial games of humanity's spiritual sickness rather than harmless entertainment. This analysis provided Christian leaders with sophisticated theoretical justifications for opposing arena culture, while offering alternative explanations for the psychological needs that gladiatorial games had traditionally satisfied. John Chrysostom, the eloquent Archbishop of Constantinople, brought the Christian critique of gladiatorial games to the eastern provinces, where Greek cultural traditions had created different relationships between entertainment and religious practice. Chrysostom's sermons against gladiatorial spectacles, delivered during the late 4th century AD, addressed audiences that included both Christian converts and traditional pagans who maintained attachments to established forms of public entertainment. His rhetorical skills and deep knowledge of classical literature allowed him to present Christian arguments in terms that resonated with educated Greek audiences, while maintaining theological consistency with broader Christian teachings. Chrysostom's approach to opposing gladiatorial games emphasized their incompatibility with the intellectual and spiritual development that Greek culture had traditionally valued, arguing that arena spectacles promoted barbarism and ignorance rather than the wisdom and virtue that Greek philosophical tradition celebrated. This cultural critique complemented theological arguments by appealing to Greek pride in their civilization's intellectual achievements, while demonstrating how gladiatorial entertainment represented a decline from classical Greek values rather than an advancement of human culture. The practical impact of Chrysostom's preaching against gladiatorial games became evident in the declining popularity of arena entertainment in major eastern cities during the early 5th century AD. Constantinople, which had never developed the same gladiatorial culture as Western cities, increasingly abandoned arena spectacles in favor of chariot racing and theatrical performances that avoided the direct violence that Christian leaders found most objectionable. This transition demonstrated the possibility of maintaining popular entertainment while accommodating Christian moral concerns, providing models that other cities could adapt to their own circumstances. The martyrdom of Saint Tmicus around 404 AD provided the dramatic culmination of Christian opposition to gladiatorial games and the immediate catalyst for their formal prohibition throughout the empire. Tmicus, a monk from Asia Minor, traveled to Rome specifically to protest gladiatorial combat by entering the arena during games sponsored by Emperor Honorius and attempting to separate fighting gladiators. The crowd's violent reaction to his intervention, which resulted in his death by stoning, created a public relations crisis for imperial authorities, while providing Christian leaders with a powerful symbol of their opposition to arena violence. The circumstances surrounding Tmicus' martyrdom revealed the continuing popularity of gladiatorial games among Roman audiences, despite decades of Christian influence and imperial discouragement. The crowd's fury at the monk's interference demonstrated that many Romans still viewed gladiatorial combat as legitimate entertainment that should not be subject to religious criticism. While their willingness to kill someone who opposed the games indicated the depth of emotional investment that arena culture continued to command. This popular resistance to Christian moral reform highlighted the challenges facing imperial authorities who sought to balance Christian principles with traditional Roman cultural expectations. Emperor Honorius's response to Tmicus' martyrdom reflected the complex political calculations that characterized imperial policy towards gladiatorial games during the Christian Empire. The emperor's formal prohibition of gladiatorial combat, issued shortly after the monk's death, represented both a genuine response to Christian moral pressure and a pragmatic recognition that gladiatorial games had become more politically costly than beneficial. The prohibition allowed Honorius to demonstrate his Christian commitment, while eliminating an expensive form of entertainment that had become increasingly difficult to sustain financially. The implementation of Honorius's gladiatorial prohibition revealed the practical difficulties of eliminating deeply entrenched cultural practices through imperial decree. While the formal ban ended official sponsorship of gladiatorial games in major imperial venues, underground and unofficial contests continued in various forms throughout the 5th century AD. Provincial authorities often ignored or selectively enforced the prohibition, particularly in regions where gladiatorial culture remained popular and economically important. These enforcement challenges demonstrated that cultural change required more than legal prohibition to be effective. The transformation of amphitheaters throughout the empire during the 5th and 6th centuries AD provided physical evidence of gladiatorial culture's decline and the broader changes affecting Roman urban life. The Colosseum in Rome, which had served as the premier venue for imperial gladiatorial spectacles, gradually fell into disuse as imperial resources were diverted to more pressing military and administrative needs. The building's underground chambers, which had once housed gladiators and exotic animals, were converted to workshop, storage facilities, and residential spaces as the city's population adapted the structure to new purposes. The conversion of amphitheaters into Christian churches represented the most symbolic transformation of former gladiatorial venues, as these buildings were redesigned to serve the religious movement that had opposed their original purpose. The amphitheater at Arles in southern Gaul was partially converted into a church during the 6th century AD, with altars and religious decorations replacing the arena floor where gladiators had once fought. These conversions required substantial architectural modifications that eliminated the underground facilities and mechanical systems designed for gladiatorial spectacles, while creating appropriate spaces for Christian worship and community gatherings. The fortification of amphitheaters during the barbarian invasions demonstrated another adaptive use for these massive stone structures, as their solid construction and strategic locations made them valuable defensive positions during times of military crisis. The amphitheater at Nemes was converted into a fortress during the 5th century AD, with residential buildings constructed within the arena and defensive walls added to the existing structure. These military adaptations preserved the buildings while completely eliminating their original entertainment functions, creating new urban landscapes that reflected the changing priorities and circumstances of post-Roman society. The residential conversion of amphitheaters created unique urban environments where families lived within structures that had once hosted gladiatorial spectacles, transforming spaces of public entertainment into private domestic settings. The amphitheater at Lucca in northern Italy was gradually filled with houses and workshops during the medieval period, creating a circular neighborhood that preserved the building's original outline while serving completely different social functions. These residential adaptations demonstrated the practical value of amphitheater construction while creating living reminders of the gladiatorial culture that had once flourished within their walls. The economic networks that had sustained gladiatorial culture gradually dissolved as demand for arena entertainment declined and alternative forms of public spectacle gained popularity. The gladiatorial schools that had trained thousands of fighters closed their doors as imperial sponsorship ended and private demand disappeared, forcing former trainers and support personnel to seek employment in other industries. The craftsmen who had specialized in producing gladiatorial equipment adapted their skills to military applications or civilian products, while animal traders shifted their focus to supplying circuses, private collectors, and other entertainment venues that continued operating despite the decline of arena combat. The cultural memory of gladiatorial games that persisted through medieval literature and Christian condemnation would eventually be transformed into tangible archaeological evidence when Mount Vuvius revealed its perfectly preserved secrets in the 18th century. The excavation of Pompeii, beginning in 1748, provided historians with an unprecedented window into the daily reality of gladiatorial life, moving beyond literary accounts and moral treatises to reveal the actual living conditions, training methods, and social dynamics that had characterized provincial gladiatorial culture during the empire's height. The gladiator barracks discovered in Pompeii's Rayo V offered the most complete archaeological evidence of gladiatorial housing and training facilities ever uncovered. The rectangular compound, measuring approximately 180 feet by 115 feet, contained 71 small cells arranged around a central courtyard where fighters had practiced their combat techniques on the morning of August 24, 79 AD. Each cell measured roughly 10 feet by 12 feet, providing basic accommodation for 1 or 2 gladiators, along with their personal possessions and equipment. The cell's modest dimensions reflected the utilitarian approach to gladiatorial housing, prioritizing security and efficient use of space over comfort or privacy. The central training area within the Pompeian barracks revealed sophisticated understanding of gladiatorial instruction methods through the discovery of multiple wooden training posts embedded in the courtyard floor at precisely measured intervals. These posts, preserved by the volcanic ash that destroyed the city, showed wear patterns consistent with repeated sword strikes and shield impacts, indicating intensive daily training sessions that had continued until the eruption interrupted normal activities. The spacing between posts suggested systematic training routines that allowed multiple gladiators to practice simultaneously without interfering with each other's movements. The weapons cache discovered in the barracks armory contained 18 helmets, 15 shields, and numerous swords in various stages of repair, providing detailed information about gladiatorial equipment standards and maintenance procedures. The helmets included examples of secure mamo and thrix types, each showing evidence of combat damage and subsequent repairs that indicated their use in actual arena contests rather than training exercises. The shields bore painted decorations and reinforcement patches that revealed both the aesthetic and practical considerations that govern gladiatorial equipment design. The gladiatorial graffiti preserved on Pompeii's walls throughout the city provided intimate insights into the social relationships and popular culture surrounding arena entertainment. Over 200 gladiatorial inscriptions have been documented, ranging from simple fighter names and win-loss records to elaborate declarations of love and admiration from devoted fans. The graffiti revealed that gladiators maintained public personas that extended far beyond their arena performances, with successful fighters achieving celebrity status that attracted romantic attention and commercial endorsements. One particularly revealing inscription from a tavern wall near the amphitheater proclaimed Celadus, the Thrian, makes the girl sigh, indicating that gladiatorial fame translated into sexual appeal and social influence within the broader community. Similar inscriptions documented the romantic relationships between gladiators and local women, including both slaves and free citizens, who were attracted to the fighter combination of physical prowess, courage, and exotic appeal. These relationships challenged traditional Roman social hierarchies while creating personal connections that humanize gladiators beyond their roles as arena entertainers. The medical evidence preserved in the gladiator barracks included surgical instruments, pharmaceutical preparations, and treatment facilities that demonstrated the sophisticated healthcare provided to professional fighters. The discovery of a complete surgical kit containing bone saws, forceps, and specialized probes indicated that gladiatorial physicians could perform complex operations, including amputations, tumor removals, and the extraction of embedded weapon fragments. The pharmaceutical materials included imported medicines and exotic treatments that exceeded the medical care available to most Roman citizens, reflecting the substantial economic investment represented by trained gladiators. The skeletal remains of gladiators discovered in the barracks and cemetery areas provided unprecedented opportunities for modern forensic analysis that revealed detailed information about fighter demographics, training effects, and combat injuries. Examination of over 80 gladiatorial skeletons using contemporary archaeological techniques demonstrated that most fighters began their careers between ages 18 and 25, with average career lengths of approximately 3 to 5 years before death or retirement. The skeletal evidence indicated that gladiators typically came from robust populations rather than the malnourished slave populations that some historical accounts had suggested. The bone analysis revealed distinctive patterns of muscle development and joint stress that reflected the specific physical demands of different gladiatorial specializations. Retiaria skeletons showed pronounced development of the shoulder and arm muscles used for net casting and trident work, while secular remains displayed the leg and core strengthening associated with aggressive pursuit tactics and heavy armor use. These physical adaptations provided scientific confirmation of the specialized training methods described in literary sources, while revealing the intensity of gladiatorial conditioning programs. The combat injury patterns preserved in gladiatorial skeletons offered detailed insights into arena fighting techniques and the effectiveness of different weapons and armor combinations. Skull injuries were surprisingly rare, indicating that gladiatorial helmets provided effective protection for the head and face, while arm and leg wounds were common and often showed evidence of successful healing that allowed fighters to continue their careers. The skeletal evidence suggested that gladiatorial combat, while certainly dangerous, was less uniformly fatal than popular imagination had assumed, with many fighters surviving multiple contests and living to retirement age. The dietary analysis of gladiatorial remains through isotope studies revealed that fighters maintained high-protein diets that included substantial quantities of meat, fish, and dairy products, supplemented with grains and vegetables. This nutritional evidence contradicted historical accounts that describe gladiators as primarily vegetarian, suggesting instead that their diets were carefully designed to support the muscle development and rapid healing required for intensive combat training. The isotopic signatures also indicated that many gladiators had traveled extensively before arriving in Pompeii, supporting literary evidence about the mobility of professional fighters throughout the Roman world. The medieval revival of interest in gladiatorial culture began during the 12th century, when European scholars rediscovered classical texts that described Roman arena entertainment in detail. The works of Tertullian, Augustine, and other Christian writers who had condemned gladiatorial games provided medieval readers with vivid descriptions of arena spectacles while reinforcing Christian interpretations of their moral significance. These rediscovered texts influenced medieval literature, art, and historical scholarship by providing authentic classical sources about Roman culture and society. The medieval tournament culture that emerged during the 12th and 13th centuries drew conscious inspiration from gladiatorial traditions, while adapting ancient combat forms to contemporary feudal values and Christian moral frameworks. Medieval knights and nobles who sponsored tournaments explicitly referenced Roman gladiatorial games as precedents for their own martial entertainments. Though they modified the ancient practices to emphasize honor, chivalry, and religious devotion rather than simple survival and popular entertainment. The tournament regulations developed by medieval authorities reflected both admiration for Roman gladiatorial organization and determination to avoid the moral problems that Christian writers had identified in ancient arena culture. The Renaissance witnessed an explosion of scholarly and artistic interest in gladiatorial culture, as humanist scholars gained access to additional classical sources, and archaeological discoveries began revealing physical evidence of Roman arena entertainment. The publication of comprehensive editions of classical authors, including Suetonius, Tacitus, and Pliny, provided Renaissance readers with detailed accounts of gladiatorial games, while archaeological excavations in Rome and other Italian cities uncovered amphitheater ruins, gladiatorial equipment, and inscriptions that confirmed and expanded the literary evidence. Renaissance artists found in gladiatorial subjects compelling opportunities to demonstrate their mastery of human anatomy, dramatic composition, and classical themes that appeal to educated patrons familiar with ancient literature. Painters like Giulio Romano and sculptors like Giambalona created works that depicted gladiatorial combat with anatomical accuracy and emotional intensity that reflected both their artistic skills and their scholarly understanding of classical sources. These Renaissance artworks established visual traditions for representing gladiatorial culture that would influence European art for centuries. The scholarly apparatus developed by Renaissance humanists for studying gladiatorial culture established methodological approaches that anticipated modern historical research techniques. Scholars like Justus Lippius and Johannes Rossinus compiled comprehensive surveys of classical evidence about gladiatorial games, while attempting to reconcile contradictory sources and fill gaps in the historical record through logical analysis and comparative study. Their work created systematic knowledge bases that served as foundations for subsequent research, while demonstrating the potential for rigorous historical scholarship about ancient entertainment culture. The Enlightenment period brought new analytical approaches to gladiatorial studies, as scholars applied rationalist philosophy and empirical methods to understanding Roman arena culture. Edward Gibbon's monumental Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire included detailed analysis of gladiatorial games as symptoms of Roman moral decay and political dysfunction, while Montesquieu and other political theorists used gladiatorial culture as evidence for broader arguments about the relationship between government systems and social values. These Enlightenment interpretations establish gladiatorial games as important topics for historical and political analysis, rather than merely antiquarian curiosity. The archaeological revolution of the 19th century transformed gladiatorial studies by providing systematic methods for excavating and analyzing physical evidence of Roman arena culture. The scientific excavation of Pompeii and Herculaneum revealed unprecedented details about gladiatorial daily life, while establishing archaeological techniques that could be applied to amphitheater sites throughout the former Roman Empire. German scholars like Heinrich Schliemann and Adolf Furtwangen pioneered systematic approaches to excavating and documenting gladiatorial sites that established standards for subsequent archaeological research. The development of modern forensic archaeology during the 20th century revolutionized understanding of gladiatorial culture by applying scientific analysis techniques to skeletal remains and other physical evidence. X-ray analysis, chemical testing, and statistical methods allowed researchers to extract detailed information about gladiatorial demographics, health, diet, and combat injuries that had been impossible to determine from literary sources alone. These scientific approaches transformed gladiatorial studies from primarily literary and artistic pursuits into rigorous interdisciplinary research programs that combined historical, archaeological, and scientific methods. Contemporary archaeological research continues, revealing new insights into gladiatorial culture through innovative analysis techniques and previously unexplored sites throughout the former Roman Empire. Recent excavations at gladiatorial schools in Austria, Turkey, and North Africa have uncovered evidence of training methods, equipment innovations, and cultural adaptations that expand understanding of how gladiatorial traditions spread and evolved throughout Roman territories. These discoveries demonstrate that gladiatorial culture was more diverse and sophisticated than earlier research had suggested. The application of computer modeling and virtual reality technologies to gladiatorial research has created new possibilities for understanding arena architecture, crowd dynamics, and combat techniques through digital reconstruction and simulation. Researchers can now create detailed three-dimensional models of amphitheaters that allow virtual exploration of underground chambers, mechanical systems, and seating arrangements while testing hypotheses about how these structures function during actual events. These technological approaches complement traditional archaeological methods while providing new tools for analyzing and presenting research findings. The enduring cultural impact of gladiatorial imagery and contemporary media reflects the continuing fascination with Roman arena culture and its themes of courage, conflict, and survival under extreme circumstances. Hollywood films from Spartacus to Gladiator have introduced gladiatorial culture to global audiences, while interpreting ancient entertainment through modern cinematic techniques and contemporary moral frameworks. These popular presentations, while often historically inaccurate in details, have maintained public interest in gladiatorial culture and generated support for continued archaeological research and historical scholarship. The influence of gladiatorial imagery on contemporary sports entertainment demonstrates the continuing appeal of controlled combat spectacles and the psychological dynamics that made Roman arena entertainment compelling for ancient audiences. Professional wrestling, mixed martial arts, and other combat sports consciously adopt gladiatorial themes and presentation styles while adapting ancient entertainment forms to modern safety standards and legal frameworks. These contemporary adaptations reveal the enduring human fascination with ritualized combat and the social functions that such entertainment serve across different cultural contexts. The modern understanding of gladiatorial culture as a complex social institution, rather than simple brutal entertainment, reflects the cumulative impact of centuries of historical research, archaeological discovery, and analytical scholarship. Contemporary historians recognize gladiatorial games as sophisticated responses to specific social, political, and economic conditions within Roman society, while acknowledging their genuine entertainment value and cultural significance. This nuanced understanding avoids both romantic glorification and simplistic condemnation, while recognizing the historical importance of gladiatorial culture within the broader context of Roman civilization. The preservation and presentation of gladiatorial sites as cultural heritage locations demonstrates the continuing relevance of Roman arena culture for contemporary society and education. The Colosseum in Rome, amphitheaters throughout Europe and North Africa, and museum collections of gladiatorial artifacts serve as tangible connections to ancient entertainment culture, while providing opportunities for public education about Roman history and society. These preservation efforts ensure that future generations will have access to physical evidence of gladiatorial culture, while maintaining the sites and artifacts necessary for continued research and discovery. The legacy of gladiatorial culture extends far beyond its immediate historical context to encompass fundamental questions about human nature, social organization, and the relationship between entertainment and violence that remain relevant in contemporary society. The Roman experience with gladiatorial games provides historical perspective on modern debates about violent entertainment, the ethics of combat sports, and the social functions of public spectacle, while demonstrating both the appeal and the dangers of institutionalized violence as entertainment. This historical perspective enriches contemporary discussions, while providing concrete examples of how societies have grappled with similar issues across different time periods and cultural contexts. The gladiatorial legacy ultimately represents a complex intersection of human creativity, social organization, and moral challenge that continues to resonate with contemporary audiences seeking to understand both ancient Roman society and their own cultural values. The arena fighters who once battled for survival and glory in amphitheaters throughout the Roman Empire have become symbols of courage, skill, and the human capacity for both cruelty and nobility under extreme circumstances. Their story, preserved in stone monuments, archaeological remains, and cultural memory, serves as a permanent reminder of humanity's capacity for both spectacular achievement and troubling moral compromise, ensuring that the gladiatorial experience will continue to inform and challenge